Welcome everyone to the ASAP PEPFAR USAID Local Partner Webinar Series. I'm Debbie Khalil. I am at USAID in Washington, DC, and the Contracting Officer Representative for the ASAP project. We are thrilled to be having our 8th webinar series today. This is a repeat and slight update from one that was done in December. And this series is going to discuss United States government rules and regulations, a really important topic for all of our award management and implementation. So we are thrilled to have this series again and update you all with the latest and greatest. Before we get started, I have a few updates to share myself, and then we'll turn it over to others to go into details on the content. So I will provide an update and some upcoming events and resources. Then we will have Catherine Brokenshire Scott do ASAP announcements, and then turn it over to Doug Frankie for the content meat of the presentation. We wanted to share in particular some this webinar series. You can see the list of webinars we've had since April and some of our planned topics going forward. And so we will continue to update this. There may be slight shifts in topics as we go, but we plan to have a webinar at least every 2 weeks for the foreseeable future. Please also give us ideas if there are topics you would like to see that we're not covering. Please let us know. We also are starting tomorrow a French webinar series and have the first one kicking off on US government rules and regulations as well tomorrow in French, complete in French. We wanted to remind people, we discussed this on our last webinar, but we are thrilled to be offering longer training opportunities for local partners in Africa. We have 940 scholarships available from different FPD schools and others. So some topics are related to COVID-19, and some topics more focused in going in depth on award management, finance, other types of trainings that are important for your operations. We have shared the details in the prior presentation webinar that was conducted last week, but we will be sending around a link later today or tomorrow with the details on how to register. There will be a brief application process, and scholarships are available on a first come, first served basis, and will be granted one course at a time, but any participants wishing to do more can apply for additional courses. You just have to complete the first course and then reapply for additional courses. So stay tuned and look for that link coming out to all those who are part of this webinar series. We also wanted to remind you all that there is USAID Implementing Partner Solutions platforms that are coming out that USAID at headquarters and the Office of HIV/AIDS is releasing. There are opportunities for partners to share how they're adapting and finding solutions in COVID-19 context, and opportunities to hear directly from some of our office leadership and other technical staff that can provide guidance and recommendations. This is not considered official formal guidance, but more opportunities to share among partners and discuss with experts. So you can see the upcoming topics that will happen in May and going forward. Some dates still to be determined, but they will be sent out to everyone and opportunities to join via links will be shared. Here are links to the previous solutions that have been conducted, and you will be able to receive this slide deck so you can click on the links and see notes and recordings from these sessions. And as a reminder, the official formal guidance from the Office of the Global AIDS Coordinator at the State Department is released every Wednesday and Friday. So please pay attention to that, those updates, and follow these links to see the latest coming out of the State Department for PEPFAR and COVID-19. And you can see some of the topics that have come out recently in the last month or so. But again, every Wednesday and Friday, those are updated. Additional resources from others outside of USAID, you can see here. And again, when you have the link to these slides, you can click on these and go directly to these resources. So with that, I will turn it over to Catherine Brokenshire-Scott, the ASAP Project Director, who can do some updates from ASAP.
Thank you, Debbie, and welcome local partners. So we have two announcements for ASAP. One, we have submitted a survey to you on COVID-19. This is our second survey, and the information really helps you to understand the realities you're living with. So if you could please take a moment to complete that survey, we appreciate it. We will be sending other surveys in the future, and we really appreciate your time in completing them. We find the information really useful. I also want to share that we're trying to set up a website for ASAP, so you'll have one place to go for all of the information, and we'll let you know when that's developed. Thank you, and that's all the announcements from me. So over to Doug.
Great, thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Debbie. I want to welcome everyone to this 8th webinar, and certainly I found them to be very informative and successful in the past, and certainly I want to thank USAID for making this possible through the IntraHealth ASAP consortium. So this presentation has been specifically edited from a larger and longer series of presentations. They're all financial management related, but this one is specifically for the cost principles. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and get back to where are we? Sorry, one second here. So in terms of, let's see if this one's up.
Doug, while you're doing that, may I please add to all the listeners, if you have questions and answers, to please write them into the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we will pause at certain intervals to ask the questions.
Sure. Okay, is that screen up for everyone?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. So yeah, Q&A is certainly very valuable, and I'll mention that again, that every question is a good question. And we have a couple general rules. Normally, of course, these courses are done face-to-face. And one of the general sustainability solutions rules is the concept of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And although we don't have 4 walls, we have virtual walls here. And the concept there is that everyone should feel comfortable asking a question without risk of showing they either don't understand or asking a question that could cause concern, such as we don't do timesheets. Okay, so just please consider that there'll be mission people on as well, possibly auditors, and well, I guess auditors won't be on, but the concept is please feel free to ask questions. And I think USAID has been very gracious also to ASAP for having time and budget available to answer questions like this even after the seminars. Okay, so the focus of this is rules and regulations, cost principles, and it is one of the essential elements, the building blocks of compliance. So we think that's quite important. And the other focus is, this is on, certainly there's many groups and types on, but the focus is certainly non-US local implementing partners who are hopefully going to be promoted to prime recipients. Okay, so this is really getting our primes ready, or our locals ready to be primes. Okay, so we'll start the clock now. And I see that this, as we say, the cost principles for non-federal entities. We're going to be talking about the 2 CFR 200, also known as the Uniform Guidance. Okay, so that's the 2 CR 200, and then the 400 section, section E, is the cost principles, okay, or are the cost principles, subpart E. So that is the focus of this group. And certainly starting point for everyone is your cooperative agreement, okay? Your agreement officer has crafted a beautiful piece, some of it's art, some of it's science, but it is a document that is unique to every organization. Certainly there are great similarities, but your document, your cooperative agreement, is what rules your relationship with USAID. And it has various parts, and we're going to be going through some of the parts. There's, well, 4 primary parts. Attachment A, which we call the schedule, and we're going to be looking at that in some detail in a few minutes. Attachment B, program description, which is pretty much defining what it is you are going to do. So when USAID put out the RFA or RFP, they said, okay, we need 10,000 people on treatment, care and treatment, or we need 1,000 male circumcisions, or we need to take care of 500 OVCs. That description will be essentially what you are going to deliver. So that is certainly, you'll be very familiar with that because it relates to your original proposal. The third section, attachment C we call, is, again, this could be a piece that depends on whether you are a US or non-US organization. And again, the focus of this class or webinar is the non-US organization. So for discussion today, we'll be talking about the non-US mandatory standard provisions, MSPs, and the required as applicable. Okay, these we had covered in a previous webinar, and part of Catherine and Debbie's discussion about those scholarships, it will be available again. Okay, attachment D is your marketing branding plan, and that is certainly how you would be using the USAID logo and using it on your cars and websites and offices and communications and various places, paraphernalia. So make sure you follow those things. Okay, so we'll be coming back to a little bit greater in detail. But I think the way to consider this is sort of an analogy, is that your understanding of USAID rules and regulations could be in pieces. Okay, so I'm going to use a puzzle analogy to sort of bring it all together and sort of highlight how it might come together. So if we start your understanding, and again, I'm mainly talking to the new local implementing partners or those who will be new primes, you might understand certain pieces of USAID and the US government and how it all ties together, but we don't expect you to, or at least I don't expect you to at this point. And now many of you may have been subs under some of the bigs, the Washington or the US based big groups. And so you may have a good understanding, but I think certainly the ASAP project has to start with, their goal is to help build you up from scratch. And that's what we certainly intend. So if anyone who has ever done a puzzle knows that the most important pieces to start with are the corners. Okay, so here you have your 4 corners coming together out of the mismatch of pieces. Your 4 corners is the starting point. And for any of you who remember the gentleman named Bob Strauss, Bob has been training for 40 years or more, and he has what's called the 4 corners concept. Okay, certainly before we had digits, you used to get paper, and the concept was when you get your award, it comes with 4 corners. And everything that you are required to comply with is within those 4 corners. It's going to be written in your award or included as an attachment or by reference. And USAID's always been quite good about including the actual attachments, the mandatory provisions and other things. I know many of you are PEPFAR people and or may have broader funding than just USAID. But I must say, USAID is quite good at including the documents, whereas if you get funding from CDC, it's more often by reference, which makes it more difficult. Okay, so we start with the 4 corners and putting our pieces together of understanding. And then we'll start pulling in the different types of issues and pieces that bring our knowledge together. And some of those could be things like our AOR designation letter. That's quite important. Your award is important, but that designation letter that should come with your award tells you what your AOR is empowered to do. Okay? Then you're going to have things like the mandatory standard provisions. You have your required as applicable provisions, certainly the cost principles, which is what this class is about today. You're going to have things like direct and indirect costs, including the 10% de minimis. That's very topical these days. Everyone's trying to get their 10%, and we'll talk about that a little bit today if we have time, but certainly that is in the additional course that Debbie was offering. Things like closeout and certainly audits. So all those pieces start coming together, and slowly you're building your knowledge until you get to this final slide where it's got the A outstanding. And for me, that A stands for audit, okay? Because certainly where USAID is going to be giving a lot of you, or many of you, a lot of money, the whole point is, and they want you to spend it correctly, it's your job, recipients, to spend it correctly, which means you must understand the rules that go with your award. Okay, and when you can pull that A in, and remember, your audit is going to be, assuming you spend more than $750,000 in your fiscal year, you'll have that audit. Okay, and so that audit is going to be very important. So what I do, I'm going to wear this hat anytime I'm talking about audits. I will put the hat on to give you the auditor perspective of where your risks may be, because certainly we're going to be talking about costs. And there is a lot of risks with those costs, and you're responsible for doing that. So I'm quite happy and proud that Sustainability Solutions, our firm, is a US-based firm that is an audit firm, registered, AICPA, Michigan Association, Government Audit Quality Center, peer-reviewed, but also certainly in Africa here, our presence is more the strengthening training side and assistance, which we're doing here. So we bring a real perspective of knowledge. Okay, I mean, we train auditors, we accredit them, so we know exactly what they're going to ask you. So our goal is to make sure you can pass that audit. Okay, so if we assume that maybe 150 new organizations are going to become primes, and assume that those primes are going to receive $10 million each, $2 million over 5 years, which is pretty reasonable. That's $1.5 billion that group is going to be responsible for collectively. Okay, now that 1 point, assuming that you are going to have to, again, you're going to be audited. Our goal is always to make sure you're 100% compliant and every cost is good, but that doesn't always happen. So assume a 2% rate of that you will only be able to recover 98%. Okay, that's still $30 million out of that 1.5 billion. Okay, so my goal today is to help you understand every potential opportunity for, well, where your greatest risks are, not every, that would be in the longer course, but where things can go wrong. Okay, so let's get started. That would be $250,000 a minute if we have 2 hours. So let's get started saving the US government and you that $30 million. Okay, we can stop and ask questions. I think you can ask questions to the moderator, Catherine, at any time. Okay, so if we look at a standard agreement, cooperative agreement, this is the Schedule A that I was referring to. Okay, and this is the most important part of understanding of your award. It's the part where the agreement officer has crafted this and put it into, this is just a normal agreement that one of our clients has, which has, but notice all the things that are in here. Okay, so the period of the cooperative agreement at A2, so great, normally 5 years. Okay, how much, the amount of the agreement and the payments. So are you on an advance or reimbursement basis? Okay, certainly the budget, hugely important. And Adrienne, who is sitting in on this from the mission, will talk a little bit more later about the importance of creating your budget and the budget justification. Okay, and then everything else that's important from a compliance point of view and delivery point of view is in here. If you've got an indirect cost rate, do you generate program income? Are you going to have cost sharing? What's your geographic codes for procurement? All of that stuff is incredibly important. So please read your award. Okay? It's so important. And who's going to read the award? Who's responsible for that? Okay? Everyone thinks everyone else is going to do it. Certainly, it's important that someone is responsible as a compliance officer. He or she Should they say, great, they take this because I can promise you, wearing my auditor hat, right? There's no doubt. The first thing we're going to ask you for is let's have your award. Let's have all the amendments. Let's have your AOR designation letter. Okay, and then we're going to ask you, of course, for your general ledger and policies and procedures, right? First thing we're going to ask for, show me your agreement. So that's very important. So someone needs to be responsible for that compliance. Okay. Also, I'm just highlighting down under A14, special provisions or special award conditions. Now that would be where the mission and the AO would include in your award issues that or items that they believe you may need to resolve or strengthen very early on after you get your award. And this would be based on the type of things that may have been identified in your NUPIS, your non-US partners survey that's being conducted through ASAP and some others right now. Okay, or just general weaknesses. Maybe as a sub, you had problems with your audits or something like that in your former life or your current life. Okay, so it's very important you reach those conditions by the deadlines. Okay, because literally the auditor is going to look, that's the first place they're going to look to see what did the AO write into this award. Oh, you've got special provisions. Did you meet them? Okay, and so the whole point is that in your award, take this note down. There's the concept of must versus should. Okay, and this came out from, I'm not going to get too deep, but the COFAR people, the people who created the uniform guidance, the OMB people, Gil Tran, Victoria Collin, they borrowed the concept of must versus should from the audit side of life, where it says, if it says you must do something, auditors must. And that concept they brought over into the uniform guidance. So everywhere it says in your award must, assume the auditor is going to look at that. They're going to take your award, they're going to run a spell check or a thing and say, what are the musts? Okay, and they're going to create their spreadsheet to say, let's test all these things. So why don't you now have your compliance person do the same thing in the cold light of the morning at the beginning of your audit process and identify those musts. Okay, any questions on that? So again, this is the Schedule A. This takes precedence over everything else. And the assumption is that the agreement officer who is supposed to know, and I'm sure they do, the uniform guidance, and therefore they have written into this award what they believe you must do. Okay, so one might debate whether what takes precedence, the award or the uniform guidance. In theory, it would be the award. The award, with the AO tells you to do something, do it. Okay, so how do we understand these rules? We're going to use a little visualization and consider that all these pieces are going to, I want you to come together, all the pieces, but you have to understand which rules apply to you, because there are differences in rules depending if you're US based or non-US based, prime or sub. Certainly a massive one is if you are a PEPFAR partner with either CDC or NIH funding, okay? Different rule sets, okay? So the important point is to know yours. So we can play a little visualization game. So assume I'm asking you to consider that we're going to play a ball game, okay? Just think in your mind, what game are we going to play? I say, great, let's go play ball. Pick a sport. Okay, would it be have one of those? Tennis ball, rugby, football, golf, cricket, basketball, baseball. Those are all games. Each of those games comes with its own set of rules. Okay, US aid has its own set of rules, different from state, different from CDC, possibly different from defense. So we're going to talk about US aid rules, but again, which rules are subsets? As I said, the big difference is US aid, is US and non-US rules. Okay, so let's take it one step further. Let's say, okay, I'm interested, we're going to go play football. Okay, so I want you to visualize which team is your team. Picture in your mind when I say football, who's your football team? Okay, would anyone pick a team like that? It's American football, New England Patriots, okay? Certainly that's one team. Some of you may have picked that team. It's the Ghana team, went far in the last World Cup, okay? They're both football. So if we didn't define which type of football, these teams, that you couldn't play the game, okay? Because these guys are going to bring a different ball. They're going to have different rules, different stadiums, okay, than this game. So you just couldn't play the game. You're both saying, no, but we're playing football. I understand the rules. Okay, the Ghana team, the Nigerians, the Ethiopians, the Egyptians, Kenyans, South Africans, all saying, this is football. Whereas other people might be saying, no, no, this is football. Okay, so it's going to be very important that we understand our rules, and that's what this course is. And again, the fuller version of this that Debbie was talking about will be available. So, okay, so where do we get our rules for the non-US NGOs? Well, this is the cover page of the mandatory standard provisions. Okay, these are your this will be attached. This will be the third section attached to your award. Okay, and you'll notice at the bottom, it's got the revision date of May 22nd. It's the last time it's been updated. And what does it say there? Well, right up front, what rules apply to you, our non-US, local implementing partners to be? Okay, well, right there, M1, number M1A says what applies to you is the 2 CFR 200 cost principles. Okay, that's us. That's what this class is about. Okay, for-profit entities have the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations. That's not you. Okay, but right up front, you've got the FAR. And then it goes on down here under B. The second most important point we're going to cover in greater detail is it's your job, recipients, to make sure all your costs are reasonable, allocable, allowable, and supported. Okay, so we're going to discuss that in a little bit of detail. Okay, what is it for the US NGOs? Okay. Again, it doesn't say in your award which cost principles. It says it in your standard provisions. And so this is for US, and the first thing they say there, and they're number 1A, but look what it says here. It doesn't say 2 CFR 200.400. It doesn't say cost principles. It says all provisions of the 2 CFR 200, the uniform guidance, all. Okay, now remember, the uniform guidance, I'm going to skip right down now to back to, let me go down here a little bit further to explain the uniform guidance briefly. Okay, the uniform guidance started with President Obama 2011 was to bring uniformity and consistency to the US government accounting. It had grown apart and different things did it differently. State, local governments, agencies doing it differently. People have their different interpretations of the rules. They said, no, let's bring it all together. Okay, so all the boxes that are in X's are the old guidance documents that applied. And of course, those of you who are either in agencies or old-time implementing partners will have dealt with some of these. So the old uniform guidance on compliance, the OMB A110, that was what we had. The other side was A102, state and local government. Well, government said, no, one. So which one's it going to be? So they consolidated those and put them, that's what the 2 CFR 200 uniform guidance is. Also, the cost principles. There used to be 3 sets. A122 for not-for-profits, the people on this call. A21, educational institutions, universities, things like that. Some of you may be on as well. Or 87, state and local government. Okay, 3. Why 3? So now we have the one that we're talking about today. Okay, A133, that's the old Single Audit Act. And that will, that's not this course, but we can talk about it any other time. But that is also gone, and now those are all in the uniform guidance. Okay, so this one document is a great, consistent document for all of us. And our cost principles today are the 400 section, 2 CFR 200.400 or subsection E. Okay, just briefly here, I want to mention though that the concept of the uniform guidance. So 99.973 or 4% of the federal government spend, okay, it's about 4 point something trillion this year, and is spent in America, in the States, okay? Only 0.2345% is spent outside of America. So these rules are designed for basically operating in the States. So when they created this federal rule, they give each agency, the rule is that the US government gives each agency 1 year to confirm whether they're going to accept these rules as is. Okay, and USAID took the provision at number 101, applicability, and said, no, for our overseas partners, we're not going to do this in complete. We're not going to force our non-US partners to comply with the entire thing. We are going to create what I've called a light version, which is the non-US mandatory standard provisions. So these compliance requirements, which is the section D or the 300, are all incorporated in your non-US mandatory standard provisions. Okay, so we, local implementing partners, have a light, I call it the light version. There's Coke Light. So here we have rules and rules light, And that's what you have to comply with. So putting my auditor hat on, when I'm auditing you, I'm actually auditing a different set of rules than I'm auditing if I'm auditing the FHIs, PACT, IntraHealths of the world. They have the full set, you've got the light set, okay? But the cost principles are all the same, okay? I'm just gonna highlight that 45 CFR. I know some of you are CDC partners, and maybe in a few more minutes, I'm just gonna ask to send in a quick, in the Q&A or the comments, just a quick yes, if you are getting funds from NIH, because the amount of people or number of people who do that might warrant a few extra minutes there. But for right now, this is only a US aid focused function, okay? So again, one more time, 2 CFR 200 uniform guidance, the full set. For non-US and non-US partners, you have the light version, which is included in the mandatory standard provisions. Okay, frequently a lot of people throw around the 300 section saying, okay, do this for cost share, whatever. The actual rule for you as an auditor, I can only hold you to the requirement of your award. Even I know if you were a US base, you should have done this. But if it's not in your award, the 4 corners concept, if it's not in that award, then I can't hold you to it. So please read your award and follow those guidelines. Okay, so back to here. This is why when we're looking at the US mandatory standard provisions, okay, it has all provisions of 2 CFR 200. Okay, 700 is just the USAID version of the tiny little differences, such as when you're overseas, you must use the metric system, you know, things that don't apply in the States. Again, CDC would have different things called, well, what do we call our chief of party? He or she might be what is it? Or for example, you know, NASA would have something to do with space dust, or the Nuclear Commission would have those sort of things, you know, what to do with the waste. So that's specific to the agencies. For this class, don't worry about that. So the bottom line here, US organizations follow the complete uniform guidance. The not-for-profits include, sorry, the non-US use these US mandatory standard provisions. Okay, I see some questions coming up. I'm going to stop just a second here. Okay, so USAID is going to give you local implementing partners your award. It's going to have Section A, Section B. C is going to be these non-US mandatory standard provisions, which include the cost principles that we're talking about now. If you have a sub under you, I believe many of you will have subs. Your job as a prime is to pass down to the subs the same thing if they're a non-US sub. Okay, so great. It's not easy. I think it's the easiest thing is to be a sub. Then you're going to be promoted to a prime. Congratulations. That comes with greater responsibilities. You now have a relationship with the US government where a sub does not. The sub works through the prime. The prime has a relationship. Okay, so you've stepped up now to prime. Congratulations. You are now more responsible. And if you have a sub, that's another bridge you have to cross, and that comes with its own challenges, and we've got a special course on that, managing subs, coming up. Okay, but I put in a red box here this discussion for US subs, because if a foreign prime or a non-US prime has a US organization as a sub, then it might be USAID sort of assuming they're helping you by putting the PACT, PATH, FHIs, you know, the guys who helped you in the past as primes under you. That could be helpful, but remember, then you have to manage those people with a rule set that is greater than yours. Okay, they've got the full 2 CFR 200 and the US provisions, which are again special things like use of the mail pouch and things like that that are not for this course. Okay, so congratulations, you're a prime. So your rule set is mandatory standard provisions, cost principles. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second and see if anyone has any questions. I think Catherine or Grace, you may wish to pose anything. Questions?
No, there are no questions at the moment. We are going to send out the slides, the PowerPoint presentation, and the recording after the webinar. So, because that's the question that everyone is asking for, so we will be able to send that out.
Fantastic. Okay. So let me carry on here from the current slide. Okay, so where does one find this guidance? Okay, so there's the website called www.ecfr, you can see it there, .gov, and that's the government website where one finds it. Okay, this is put up by the OMB, and basically you can see at the bottom of the slide, you will browse for your title. So it's Title II, and that is grants and agreements, and eventually you will click your way through 3 different slides, but you'll eventually get to the uniform guidance. Okay. What I suggest is printing out the sections that you want for yourself. Okay. The reason I say this is because, yes, it can always be online, and so that tells you when we did the last webinar. It was 3 days after this, because it takes 3 days for them to update it. So we did something about December 2nd or 3rd. So right now, as of wherever we are, the 19th or the 20th today, it would be updated as of May 16th or 17th, right up to date. Okay, so if you have any really, really contentious issues with your auditor or something, make sure you're using the right version. But in general, I would go here and print out your version here. So this is what I'll do is I'll get into it to show you what it is. Let's just see if I can do that. Let's get into, without screwing up too much here. Let's go to ECFR 200. Is that sharing? Is sharing a Grace? Is that sharing the?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so here's your Code of Federal Regulations, and we're going to be very brief here because it's in the other course. But there's basically 6 important sections. The first sections is A, acronyms and definitions. So there are basically 90 on the USAID version, I'll call it, versus CDC. There's 99 definitions, and these are really fantastic. What the U.S. government has done, OMB, they pulled together all the definitions from the various sources and cleaned them up and put them right here. So if you're new to U.S. government and USAID, certainly go here and read these, because these are very useful. Okay. And that is a total of, I think it is 8 pages. Okay, then the next 4 pages is the subpart B. And this is where the general provisions of how it's about this document. It's actually the management of the uniform guidance. When it went into effect, you don't need anything out of here, but I do want to highlight that down here under conflict of interest and mandatory disclosures, certainly USAID, when they pulled out and created their light version, they insisted on pulling out these things and putting it into the mandatory standard provisions. So you would see that in your, you will find that in your MSPs. Okay. Next is subpart C, which is what pre-federal award, what happens before you get your money. Okay, and that's only 4 pages, and that's not actually important for you realistically, because this happens to you. Okay, so this is basically, you'll see under number 204, that is where the agency USAID has to assess, 205 is your risk. 204 is your merit, how good you are. Yes, of course, you're all good, but my concern is what risks are posed. And so that's where they would go, and this is where the NUPIS would fall under there. They say, great, we're going to go and perform an assessment, and that is going to end up in resulting in what's at 207, those specific award conditions that will be put into your award. Okay. So then let's get down to what now becomes really important. This is the subpart D, post-federal award. Once you got your award, or once you get your award, this is what you're meant to comply with. Okay, so this is what I call the light part. Okay, one more time, USAID said for our non-US organizations, we are going to extract the relevant parts and put it into the mandatory standard provisions. So that's the big difference. For the US organizations, you have to comply with all of these. For the non-US, you comply with your mandatory standard provisions. Okay. And again, we're going to go through, well, more in the other course, but we will talk about some of these things, because some of these things also relate to certainly your costs. Equipment and some of these things are in here. Subrecipient management, closeout, okay, a separate course on that. Okay, and then so today's course is going to be here, which is the cost principles. Okay, cost principles are 23 pages.
Hey, excuse me, Doug.
Yep.
We cannot see your screen. You're seeing the PowerPoint. Is that where you are still?
I'm sharing the screen. Okay, so, okay, sorry about that. Thanks for letting me know. I thought I was going through, so let's just jump back. This is where you are here then. Is that correct? There. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for letting me know. So I was trying to walk you through the visual of the ECFR. Okay. So basically, let's just go into what it would look like. This is what I was getting to right now. This is what it looks like visually, the 400 section. This is in the cost principle. So assume before this, there were 3 different sections, 300, 200, 100, and the acronyms and definitions. Okay, so this is what we are going to be talking about here. This is what the ECFR looks like when you get into it. Okay, so if we went back to here, that's the starting point. A couple clicks through and you're there. Start with 2 CFR and look for 2 CFR 200. Okay, so what I show here is a typical PEPFAR project. Okay, you could have many or all of these types of expenses. And the important point is to be careful when you are doing your proposal. And I'm going to ask Adrienne to jump in here, how incredibly important it is when you are doing your proposal that you are extremely clear on what activities you need money for. And so we call it activity-based costing, where you would say, I got 1,000 male circumcisions, I need 1,000 test kits. And I see Adrienne, welcome. Adrienne, you were great last time, please jump in.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize the importance of making sure your budget narrative is up to snuff. So a lot of people spend a lot of time working on their budget, on their Excel budget, they detail all the costs, which is amazing. But the budget narrative really supplements the budget. And that's where you describe how you estimated things. So if you are purchasing flights, you might want to say we went to this website to find out how much a flight to Tanzania would cost. If you have something like rent, maybe you already have an office and you already have a lease, so you can explain that we have a current lease and it's $5,000 a month. And maybe your lease is $5,000 a month, but you're only charging the government $2,500 a month because only 50% of that building will be used for USAID projects. So I just want to emphasize budget narrative is super important, and it helps USAID determine the fairness of the cost that you proposed in your budget. Back to you, Doug.
Great, thank you. So you could have all these, or you may not, but you may say, well, hang on here. So realize that there are only 55 specific cost principles that we're going to see the important ones or the most relevant ones in a few more minutes, okay? So, and some of them specifically state you cannot, some of them are sort of negative. You cannot charge alcohol to the US government. You cannot charge fines, traffic fines. You cannot charge gifts. Certain types of entertainment and not allowed, okay? So, already there's 4 or 5 things you can't do. So there may be 50 that say you can charge these costs. But what I want you to recognize is that cost principles only define allowability. And there's 4 components that we're going to see: reasonable, allocable, allowable, and supported or documented. Okay, so again, one of the Bob Strauss-isms is that any cost may or might be allowable if it is reasonable, allocable, and not specifically disallowed. Alcohol, specifically disallowed. Bad debts, or you've got debts that people didn't pay you, that's your problem. Traffic fines, that's your problem, okay? So any cost may be, because the US government doesn't try to define every cost as allowable, okay? It's that your job is to communicate, as Adrienne said, when you're doing your proposal, this is what we intend to spend on. And I have to admit, having looked at for 38 years now, well, 38 years USAID, but probably 20 now with CDC, USAID is really good at, if you put in your budget what it is you plan to spend it on, and they don't kick it out, generally that will be allowable. Not reasonable, not allocable. That's not their job to define that. That's the auditor's job, right? I'll put my auditor hat on, right? As Adrienne said, you said rent is, you own half of the buildings used for your USAID project. Well, then I expect you as the auditor only charge half your rent to the US government or USAID, okay? The problem with CDC, again, great people, but the problem is they don't play by the same rule. Their rule is just because you put it in the budget, and just because you gave you the budget doesn't mean anything. The auditor is going to decide at the end of the day, okay? So there's a little bit more gray area there. Okay, so let's just make sure, as Adrienne says, document why you need everything, justify it, and you'll be in a much better place. Okay,
there's
so
a question there.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Grace.
Okay, someone is saying my understanding was that the equipment consists of items. Where did that question go? 1 second, I think I just lost
It
it.
consists of items
Oh.
that cost more than 5,000, but I see that it includes laptops, etc., which cost less than 5,000. So can you please clarify?
Sure. Okay, we'll get to equipment. We'll be talking about that. And certainly the magic threshold for equipment is over $5,000. Okay, and that has to do with your asset, your fixed asset register and the things you keep. And but you talked about laptops and things. The new rule on laptops or electronic equipment, any electronic device that is less than $5,000 currently is deemed as a supply, not even equipment. Now you have to be a little careful here. If your own policies and procedures say, no, we treat laptops as equipment, then you must follow your own policies as well. But for laptops specifically, any electronic device now can be deemed a supply, meaning you don't even have to keep track of it. Now overseas, most NGOs absolutely do keep track of laptops. Most people have what we'll call a capitalization policy of around $500 versus $5,000. Okay, so we'll come to that equipment when we get under E or equipment. They're alphabetical. Okay, let's maybe just park that one for a minute. And if we don't cover it, then please ask again. Okay, so this just says, this is at the very beginning of the 400 section now of every section of the US government guidelines say what its purpose is and applicability. So again, we are talking about the cost principles for cooperative agreements with non-federal entities, with a focus on local implementing partners. And as you see here, applicability, it's used by all federal agencies that sponsor non-federal entities and subs. So again, prime, sub, doesn't matter. We're all playing by the same rule set, the same ball. Okay, so there are 3 general sections. We're going to cover basic considerations in a few minutes. Okay, that's part of this course. Certainly direct and indirect costs is beyond this course. There's a separate course on that. I will, if I have time in the end, talk about the 10% de minimis. Just 1 minute is very important on MTDC, the new definition, or the one that people aren't aware of. And then we're going to go now into these numerous selected items of cost. Okay, so again, if you were looking at that, that is the basic considerations are the first section. And what we're going to talk about is 403, 404, 405. And 407, so reasonable, allocable, allowable. Those 3, 403, 4, and 5. It's actually a requirement, recipients, to include a copy of this in your finance manuals. So literally cut and paste these rules into your manuals. Okay? And that's because reasonable, allocable, allowable. It doesn't matter if the finance manager, she or he understands it. It's for all of your staff who deal with costs to understand it. So it needs to be in a place that they get. What does our organization, how do we look at reasonable, allocable, and allowable? Okay, this 407 here is quite important. If I don't get a chance to talk about it later, this is a place where I think there's 28 specific requirements where you need to get prior written approval, normally from your agreement officer, your AO. She or he is the important person who gives a written approval, right? I mean, frequently people say, no, my AO said this or that. That doesn't count, right? As an auditor, I want it in writing because prove to me your AO said that. She or he, obviously when an AO comes back to you in writing, they know what they're doing. They're binding the government or making some sort of certainty for you. But frequently you'll be talking with your AO and AOR and you'll say, oh, how about this? And the AOR says, yeah, that sounds okay. And the AO doesn't say anything and you just assume it's okay. It's not okay, okay? You must have it in writing. So if the minute you hang up the phone after that phone call, you say, dear AO, AOR, this is what we said. Can you please confirm back that you approved whatever it was you're asking for? Okay. So that first section is the basic. Then beneath that, you see direct and indirect. So that would be, direct 413, 414. That's where your NICRA and your 10% de minimis is. Very exciting areas. And then this is what we're going to be jumping into now. Okay. So here, we're not going to do all of them, as we said, but I can promise you right there, you can see looking at these numbers, you see alcohol beverages, not allowed. Okay, bad debts, not allowed. This is just a screen grab. So that's what you would be going through. So please, what you do is you go back and if you when you're in ECFR, if you click on the subtitles, right? If you click on basic considerations, you'll be able to print out all of these. If you click one higher, which is just the section E, you'll do the whole cost principles. And as I said, that is only 23 pages. Okay, so let's just think about this. Even though you're non-US NGOs and the Uniform Guidance section D, which is the 300 section, doesn't formally apply to you, assume it does. Because if you can comply with I'll call it the full set or the heavy set, and that's only 16 pages, you will likely be compliant. Okay, if you're going to spend $10 million of US government money, you deserve to spend time reading 39 pages of guidelines. It's worth it, right? It'll keep all that money for you, and hopefully you won't have to pay it back, right? So please invest the time. You know, read your award, read everything in the award, have your compliance person, or it's a responsibility. It's not a person, but someone needs to take responsibility for that compliance. Okay, so that's what it looks like. So let's go over the primary concept of reasonable, allocable, allowable, supported. Right, one more time. Put the auditor hat on. Okay, as an auditor, I must determine that every cost you charge to the USAID is all four of these. If it isn't, you will have a questioned cost. Now, the role of the auditor is to question costs. We don't make an ultimate decision. The AO does. They decide its ultimate allowability. But the job of the auditor is to put it out there. So we'll test all four of these concepts. Okay. So let's make sure we know what these concepts are. Reasonableness. This is called the prudent person rule. I'm not going to read it, but basically a cost is reasonable if it doesn't exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person. So what is a prudent person? The prudent person concept is we are all prudent with our own money. So USAID and the US government wants you to be as careful and prudent and thrifty with their money as you are with your own. Right? So when you get your paycheck, you know where it's going to: food, rent, school fees, kids' fees, whatever else, you know, depending on your circumstances. You're prudent. That's your money. Do the same thing with the US government money. Be as careful with theirs as you are with theirs. That's reasonable. Okay, and the second point is, the point here is, at the time you made the decision to incur that cost. Why do they say that? Well, remember, you are spending money for a year, and your audits only due 9 months after that. That's 21 months later. 21 months from now, there could be some big decision, big look backs in this COVID period on what was reasonable. Okay, so if we're under lockdown, we're in South Africa here, we're at day 54, whatever we are. Okay, I can promise you the 2 days before lockdown, if you couldn't find hand sanitizers, you couldn't find masks, you couldn't find gloves. If you could, that hand sanitizer used to be $2 a bottle, you'd be lucky if you get it for 10, if you get it at all. So let's say the NGO guy, procurement person, went out there and he or she bought, they said, oh my God, this is the last ones on the shelf. I'm buying all 10 of them. And they were $10. Now later on, the auditor comes and says, what, these things cost $2. What, that's not reasonable. So you say, no. At the time I made the decision to incur the cost, to buy the sanitizer, the gloves, the mask, they were X. Okay, so please document that, because later on, auditors aren't going to necessarily see that. Okay, a few extra considerations. Reasonableness. Did you need, the first bullet point, did you need to incur that cost for this project, for your project? Okay, so many people need to have vehicles. Okay, great. So you put it in your budget. As Adrian said, you say, no, great. We're going to have 3 teams out in the rural areas, and we need 4-wheel drives because it is very busy and the roads are bad and dangerous, etc. Great. So you have justified why you need vehicles, and that's reasonable. Okay, but how many people need a boat? Okay, you say, well, no, I'm in South Africa. We don't need a boat. But if you're in Malawi, working Lake Malawi, or Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya on Lake Victoria, or Madagascar, or any place that has a lot of water, you may be on or around the water for your needs. So justify, we need a boat. Who needs a plane? Okay, South Sudan, you need a plane. Ethiopia, when we did this training up in Ethiopia, that was the only place in the world I've ever seen someone needed a boat and a plane and a vehicle. So, but if you need it, justify it. Okay, otherwise, don't put it in it's not reasonable for you to have those things. Okay. Skip the next one. The third bullet point is very important. Market prices for comparable goods in the geographic area. Remember, 99.73% or 4% of the costs are spent in the States. The one thing about the States is it's competitive. If you want a computer, last time I was back there buying computers, you go to Amazon or Best Buy or Walmart or whatever, and you go to computers and boom, within 1 second, you get massive competition at less than $1 different prices. So if I can pay $800 for a computer or $801 for the same computer, I'm going to go for the 800, assuming it comes, next day, all that stuff being equal. So that's possible in the States. That's not so possible in all PEPFAR countries. Certainly here in South Africa, if I want a generator, I'm not going to go to generators.co.za or ZA. I'm going to go down to the place that sells generators. So it's very important here. Let me just say this wearing my auditor hat. I want to see that you did your best job to ensure competition, which means show me that you've updated your preferred vendor lists. Show me. How do you buy? Where do you buy from? How do you make those choices? Because literally we have blackouts here quite regularly, and so you need a generator. So how did you buy yours? Show me the process. Show me where you got that list. Okay, that's what the auditor is going to look for. Okay, the next prudence is just good governance. Did you consider all your stakeholders? So again, you may have gone to the store to buy the hand sanitizers and said, I'm not going to pay $10 for hand sanitizer. It should be $1. Well, you haven't necessarily acted with prudence in terms of your stakeholders are your employees. You have to think, hang on, I've got to protect my employees, so I'm gonna spend the $10 because I care about my staff. Okay, so think about who's your stakeholders: your employees, the people you're serving in the community, the government you're working in, Rwanda, Kenya, wherever you are, and also the U.S. government, U.S. taxpayer. Those are all the stakeholders in your concept of prudence, doing the right thing. Okay, and finally, deviating from your established practices. Okay, of course, USAID is enabling you to be a partner because you are probably fairly prudent and spendthrift, and you're careful with money, and you're going to be good, of course, at achieving. Okay, so now that you're going to get $10 million, don't all of a sudden change your rules and say, it was so difficult under our no money or very little money, and now that we've got all this money, we're changing. Well, that's not the concept. So of course, if you were if you had no money for anything, now you do. But in the past, if you say you had cheese sandwiches, when you had to go, when your staff had to go out in the rural areas, and you say, okay, our per diem or our allowance is $5 for meals. And now you say, oh, well, hang on, the State Department or the USAID rules are $60 for meals. Now, okay, the rule is, stay as you were. And again, certainly if you are going to, when it's your money, if you're only spending $5 for your people, you're only spending $5 under the USAID project. Okay, we can talk more about that. So that's reasonable. Now, it's your job, recipients, to determine reasonableness. My job as the auditor is the ultimate arbiter, though, of is that reasonable? So it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what you think. That's why it's important to justify and potentially also get prior approval for certain things. And we will see that in a few more minutes, right? Your AO can prove things as reasonableness, but they're not necessarily going to do it unless you ask, okay? Allocability. Okay, this is what Adrian talked about a little bit. So basically, how much of your cost can you allocate to your, we call them particular cost objectives. So let's just say your project. Your project is a final cost objective. A final cost objective is a resting place for a cost. You can have intermediate cost objectives, but at the end of the day, your final cost objectives are your projects. You're going to allocate cost to the projects. So let's get down to the three types of costs. Okay, the first concept, though, is consistency. Okay, I can say one thing. As an auditor, I want to see consistency between periods, years, and I want to see consistency between projects. Okay, I want to see that you're not gouging the U.S. government on their project because it's got deep pockets or it's a big budget. Okay, so whatever you're charging for your EU, your Global Fund, Gates Foundation, your other sort of donors who are funding this, the U.S. government's going to pick up its fair share. Okay, so don't say, as Adrian said, if rent is your rent for the month is $5,000 and one floor is USAID and one floor is someone else, USAID picks up its fair share, half. You can't say, oh, I put in the budget 5, not realizing that the EU projects are going to start. So it's in the budget. I'm going to charge the budget. That's wrong. No, you charge the actual fair share consistently. Okay, so let's just talk briefly about these 3 different types of things. So first we have, so we have what we will call the direct costs. The only reason, so cost specifically for the award. Great, I've got 10,000 people on care and treatment. I'm going to need 10,000 test kits, or I'm going to need, whatever, reagents for 10,000 people. I've got 1,000 male circumcisions planned. I need 1,000 test circumcision kits. I'm going to have 500 orphans. Okay, I'm going to need 500 beds. Those costs that are specifically for the award, those are easy. They'll generally be direct costs, and as an auditor, I've got no problem because you will have certainly identified those as per Adrienne. Okay, the second one is a cost that benefits both your USAID and other projects. So rent was the example there. So you can split rent based on some logical allocation method, which is normally based on space. Okay, HR costs would be based on headcount. IT probably based on headcount or points of presence. Okay, finance costs might be based on spend. Procurement based on possibly, again, spend or procurement. Okay, so those are reasonable bases or methods for allocating your costs. Okay, so again, that would be how you would have maybe your other direct costs. Okay, it's this third bullet point that I think people miss out on. And since I've started with USAID rules in 1982, which is 38 years ago, and if you read the old cost principles and the old guidance, the concept of this third one is that if you must incur a cost to be in business, the US government will pick up its fair share. Okay, so when we perform the NUPISs under ASAP, one of the first section is, your legal, your structure, your organization. And we're expecting you to have a board and minutes and meetings and all this stuff. So if that's the first thing we're looking for, then conceptually, well, I guess if you're looking for it, I need to have it. Okay, I need to be a little careful here because wearing the auditor hat, frequently the question is, did you legally have to have it? Well, if you did to be in business, yes, that will be an allowable cost, but only the portion. Again, these things can't necessarily be split like the second bullet point. Okay, space is space, but board costs, that's a little tougher to do. So generally, as an auditor, I would say, okay, if your U.S. government project's 10 million and your EU project is 10 million as well, then maybe split that 50-50. What I'm looking there is for consistency. Okay, but please make sure. And so here frequently, people are going to say, well, why should we pick up that? Well, because I need to have that cost to be in business. Okay, so just please. But make sure you identify those. And if you have any questions, confirm it with your AO. But if Adrienne wants to jump in here, I don't know if there's a special section or whatever under your cost justification, budget justification, but that is the rule. And I have to admit, you're going to see in a few more minutes, USA doesn't make it specifically clear on this one. The first two, absolutely. The third one, you'll see in the mandatory provision, it's not so specific. Okay, this just talks about allocability. This just makes sure that you only charge USAID its fair share of your indirect costs. Okay, F&A means facilities and admin. That's beyond this course. It'll be in the indirect course, but or when we talk about de minimis. Okay, but basically, you shouldn't take money from organizations or donors who aren't going to enable you to cover your overheads. Everyone just says, "Oh, USAID's going to pick it up." USAID's not going to pick it up. Okay, they will expect. If the Elton John Foundation is going to give you $100,000 to save 30 orphans, and frequently these foundations say, but we just want to pay for direct costs. Let someone else pay the indirects. Sorry, who's going to do that? Not USAID, okay? And the auditors are going to be looking for that. And the final point here is each award stands alone. Now you'll be audited together, but each award comes with a budget, and we're going to check to see that the costs for each project relate to its own budget. Okay, I'm going to have to move on here reasonably quickly. Any questions coming up,
Yes.
Grace?
We have a number of questions. Yeah, Grace, do you want to read a few of them?
Yes, I can do that. So the first question is, can you expatiate more on expected responsibility of an internal auditor and the compliance officer of a non-US federal entities?
Okay.
And then, do you want me to read all of them, or do you want to
No,
answer one?
okay. Just read that one again. An internal auditor or a non-federal entity. Maybe I didn't hear that question correctly. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
like, can you explain more on expected responsibility of an internal auditor and the compliance officer of a non-US federal entities?
Okay. Okay. How many questions do we have? Just carry on.
We have 8 questions. Then the second question is, has this non-US mandatory standard provision included all the necessary cost principles for the local implementing partners? Then if non-US, did you get that one?
Yeah.
If non-US organizations are not expected to comply with all SMPs and US organizations do, how the non-US organizations manage US organization when non-US organizations are prime and sub-recipient? What are the major challenges in such kind of partnership? What do you advise LIPs are going to that are going to be prime and US-based organizations sub in the coming RFA?
Okay, let me just address those first of all. So the last one first. Okay, so one more time. The ADS 303. Okay, so 2 CFR 200 is all those 5 sections that I talked about. Okay, the 300 section, 2 CFR 200.300, which is the post-federal award requirements, the 300 section. Okay, those apply to the US-based organizations. Okay, they do not apply to the non-US. So as I said, the USAID, they took what they wanted our non-US LIPs to comply with and put those into the non-US mandatory standard provisions. So effectively, the non-US mandatory standard provisions are a subset or a light version of the compliance section. The US firms have to comply with all of it. You'll see here, this is the US version, all provisions of 2 CFR 200. So that includes the cost principles and those post-award federal requirements. For the non-US, okay, it's just the cost. This is in the mandatory standard provisions. So this is effectively, this M1 is effectively the 300 section of the uniform guidance. Okay, so there are differences there. Okay, the question on internal audit, many NGOs are never going to have, especially the new guys, the small guys aren't going to have an internal audit group. They'd be lucky, you know, if they have a function that may even be outsourced. You can certainly outsource your compliance. And so your requirement isn't internal audit. Your requirement is compliance. You don't have to have an internal audit group, but certainly if you're a small NGO with 20 or 30 people and only 5 people in finance, then one person, she or he, is going to be responsible for that compliance. Okay, I can't define, you know, it's a responsibility, not a role specifically. There's no job, well, it could be a job description, but it's a task that someone takes on. Read the award, search for all the musts, certainly comply with those, have a plan, have a Gantt chart, whose job, by when, get it done, right? Tick it off. That's what the auditor is going to look for. Show me who did the compliance stuff. Okay, the third question relates to, I mean, I'll call it ADS 303 as well. Read that one again, please. The third question.
The third question is, if non-US organizations are not expected to comply with all SMPs.
No, that's not true. They are, the MSPs, mandatory standard provisions. Non-US are not expected to comply with the 300 section of the uniform guidance, post-federal award requirements. They are, that MSP, the mandatory standard provisions, is what they must comply with, okay? That's essentially what this is. What's on your screen right now, those are the mandatory standard provisions for non-US NGOs. Okay, it's about 89 pages, and that is definitely what you're going to comply with.
Okay, do you want me to move on to the next question?
Sure.
I need some clarity, please. If a director of an organization owns the building that the sub is renting, is that considered an allowable cost, or will it be considered a conflict of interest?
Okay, it could be allowable. First of all, it is a conflict of interest, but remember, there's thousands of conflict of interest. There's no problem with the conflict. The only problem is if you don't declare it, okay? And in our mandatory standard provision course, we very clearly stated, and as a matter of fact, let's see if I got this up for you. Let's see if Here is your, okay, what are you seeing on your screens right now?
The
Are you seeing
M1
mandatory
all
standard provisions, or what's showing here on your
allowable
screen?
cost.
So you're still seeing my screens,
Yeah, all the screens starting with allowable cost.
Okay, that's not going to help. Okay. But so basically in the mandatory standard provisions, there's new requirements for conflict of interest. Okay. And it's very important that so it happens all the time. My wife owns the IT shop. Can we buy from there? So the answer is yes, well, possibly if you declare it. Okay. So in that situation, if the chief of party or the director owns the building, as an auditor, I want to see, one, was that declared? And two, was it reasonable? And the reasonableness of the cost would be, the question is, if I rented that across the street from a similar building in a similar neighborhood with similar facilities, what would I pay? And the bottom line, I want to see arm's length transaction value. That's not going to be an arm's length transaction, but the auditor is only going to allow the portion that would have been paid if it wasn't a related party. So, but you got to declare it. Okay, and the new rule is you got to declare it within 10 days of knowing you have a conflict, and the agreement officer normally will make a decision within 30 days of whether you can incur that cost. You're not allowed to incur the cost until the AO approves that. Be careful there, because there's a lot of conflicts and auditors will be looking for that. Okay, next question.
The next question is, has this non-US mandatory standard provision included all the necessary cost principles for the local implementing partner?
Yeah, okay, so the cost principles aren't in the provisions as we see here. This is what's on your screen right now. That is what it says. It tells you the first mandatory provision says what applies to you, not non-NGOs, is the cost principles, which is its own section. That's its own puzzle piece. Okay, that's what we're talking about now for the next half hour.
Okay.
Specific section of the federal regulations, the uniform guidance. Okay, but it is only 23 pages, guys. So you can easily understand 23 pages. Okay. Next.
Please explain arm lengths and bargaining again.
So an arm's length transaction means two parties who are not related deciding on a fair market price. Okay, so an arm's length transaction is I go to a market and I want to buy a kilo of tomatoes. Okay, and arm's length is I say I think it's worth 50 kwacha or 100 shillings, and the other person says no, I want 150, and we haggle and we get to 120. That's an arm's length transaction. Okay, or I go into the shop and I see a computer is on the shelf and it's fair, it's listed, it's priced there, people are buying it. That's an arm's length transaction. It's an open transaction, generally where there's competition and no collusion or conflicts.
All right, the next question is, as Doug said, we can follow our organizational policies for categorizing of equipment or supplies. So do you mean that we have the possibility to report to USAID as an equipment category when an item purchased below 5,000?
Okay, so a couple important points. You must follow your own policies and procedures and the US government's, assuming they don't conflict. So wearing my auditor hat, right? If you say we are going to say everything more than $1,000 is deemed equipment, even though the US government rule is 5,000. Everything above 5,000 you need to keep a asset register for, and that's in the other course, but attend the next one and you'll get this answer. But the whole point is there are rules there. So the US government sets a $5,000 threshold. If an organization says, no, we care about our computers or anything, we care about our generators, our air conditioners, our whatever at $1,000, and again, many NGOs use 500, then that's what you have to follow. And so you can't, so when I come into audit and you say, hang on, but you got a $2,000 motorcycle here and you didn't include it. You say, yeah, but USAID says 5. I'm saying, no, I'm going to hold you to your own policy. If you said 1,000, then this should be on that register finding. Okay, so with equipment, again, you have to be a little careful. Computers are specifically deemed supplies under the new uniform guidance. So those, anything under 5,000 can immediately be deemed a supply. But your policy has to then be able to say that. Okay, so again, your policy your policies need to be fairly nimble in relationship to the U.S. Government guidance. When I say nimble, I mean you have to take into consideration what USAID wants you to do and then possibly adjust your policies and procedures for that. Okay, maybe we'll take that one offline. I think the good thing about ASAP and USAID is they made funds available through IntraHealth and the ASAP consortium for additional possible Q&A after the fact. And when you put these Qs in that we don't get them done, they will be answered in the Q&A document that comes out later. Okay, next question.
Do you want to continue and then we can take up the other questions, about 5 or 6 of them?
Good
Okay.
for me. I'll take my auditor hat off. Okay, so let's get back into where we were. We are, so the basic considerations. Okay, so here's where we are: reasonable, allocable, allowable. I've talked about reasonableness. Allocability, we've done those. Okay, allowability. Okay, so now remember, cost principles only relate to, is a cost allowable? Can you charge the US government and USAID for these costs? So we're in the 400 section, we're in the basic section now before the details, but this is what they say. So again, very high level. A, to be allowable, a cost must be reasonable and allocable. That's why we cover those first. I mean, I did 404, 405 first, but I do that because when you get to allowability, you have to know if a cost isn't reasonable, then it's not going to be allowable. Okay, the B section, there's our limitations and exclusions in these cost principles that you have to consider. Next, consistent treatment. So this first consistency is, it needs to be consistent with the organization's policies and procedures. That applies, again, uniformly to both your US aid and US government projects and your non-US government projects or activities. So again, if you've been incredibly frugal and you've got a $5 policy for lunch when you're out of town, okay, all of a sudden you get this new $10 million award, you say, no, for the US aid people, they get the US aid per diem. And for the rest of us, we're still on cheese sandwiches. Okay, well, no. I mean, if anyone eats cheese sandwiches, you all do. Okay, so that's the consistent treatment. Another example we use is, okay, we say, okay, so I need an M&E person, and on the USAID project, we're going to charge her out at $30,000 a year. Then I look next as the auditor, so I'm wearing my auditor hat, and I'm not auditing the EU project or Gates, but I'm looking to see how much did you allocate of an M&E person to the EU project or that one. And then I find out that they only picked up a $25,000. And I'm saying, but hang on, same type of project, same competence of the people. Why are you charging USAID $30,000 for that person? And the absolute wrong answer is because it was in the budget. Okay? It doesn't matter what was in the budget. That's not reasonable. I would say to you, why can't USAID pay 25 and let EU pick up the $30,000 person? Okay, so unless there's a reason specifically, I want to see consistent treatment. Okay, that D has to do more with direct and indirect costing. That's beyond this course. Okay, E, F, and G here. Frequently, we're going to talk about depreciation later if we have time, but basically sometimes you're going to have to need generally accepted accounting principles, or you might need, if you have a pension plan, you might need actuaries, some authority on how you charge stuff. So for example, if you own your own building, you can charge depreciation to USAID, okay? Because you don't have to rent because you own it. But how much can you charge? Well, depreciation has to be based on a logical basis. So buildings are normally 40 to 50 years. So great. Generally accepted accounting principles would say X. You own your own vehicles, you own your own generator, you own your own computers. Okay, if you don't have to buy them for the project and you're using them on the project, you can charge the US government. It used to be called a use charge, but they don't use that anymore. So let's just say it's a depreciation allowance. Okay, let's not worry about cost share. And the final point there, G, is documented. So it was reasonable, allocable, allowable, supported. Again, if I don't see it, wearing the auditor hat, if I can't see that you incurred the cost, I can't see how you procured the computers, I can't see how you determined the travel, I can't see people travel, but I see the cost come through. If you can't prove it to me, I'm a doubting Thomas, right? That's our job as auditors. Show me you incurred the cost, show me the documentation. That's the fourth sort of bullet point. Okay, so those are your four critical factors for all costs to be charged. So when we get into the cost principles now, all we're saying is that cost allowable? So many of these things, rent, yes, but then is it a conflict? Yes, well then I bet okay. Okay, so $10 hand sanitizer, is it allowable? Hand sanitizers, absolutely. Is $10 reasonable? It depends. On that day, I had to pay $10 to get it. That's reasonable. Okay, so that's where we are. So just one more point here. This is from, again, the mandatory standard provision number 1. So we looked at this basically earlier. I'm not going to go back, but I'm trying to highlight the third bullet point here. And this is where USAID, this comes from 407. I said I'd be mentioning that, so write it down if you're taking notes. But this is 2 CFR 200.407. And this is where USAID puts it right out there for you. That's why it's so important, as Adrian said, to get your budget right. But for costs not clearly addressed in the principles, because they're not all in here, or not included in your proposal stroke budget, if you don't know, ask the AO and get a written determination on its allowability and allocability. Okay, now the reason I put allowability in red is because this actually differs a little bit from the uniform guidance. 407 says reasonableness and allocability, okay? So between the two, you've got the authority to get things to be reasonable, allocable, and allowable. Okay, so if you don't know, ask. So one of our normal principle rules when we do our physical training is certainly rule number 3 is revisit your budget. Okay, because in the COVID period right now, there's stuff you certainly didn't plan to pay. You didn't plan to incur, and now you're gonna need to know. And that's when Debbie earlier on talked about those guidance. And if I have time at the end, I'll show you the guidance on some of these costs, on their allowability. And I see some gray areas. So don't have a gray area. Ask your AO, and preferably before you incur the cost. So all these things about masks and all this, and now you're gonna have to clean your offices and all these new costs, right? Especially for the new costs, you're meant to get prior approval. Okay, I'm gonna leave that at that because that gets beyond. So now I'm jumping into the actual, I think we've got about a half hour here for me, I think. Let's just see here. Okay, I've got about 15 or 20 minutes to get through these. So, and then we'll do Q&A. Okay, so these are the specific items of cost that, again, this is your cost principles. As I said, 23 pages. It's worth reading, please. Okay, so advertising, public relations, you got to be careful here. It's very specific. The only thing you can charge under this heading, we'll just do advertising, is recruiting people. Yes, how do you find new people? We got a recruiting system. That's allowable. Okay, you're advertising maybe in the newspaper or jobs or monster.com or somewhere to find people. There's going to be a cost. That's allowable. Buying goods and services. Yes, because the U.S. government wants competition, so frequently you're going to need to put it out there to find competition. Of course, I still expect you to reach out through your preferred vendor list, but regardless, you can advertise for that. The third one, it's not going to be for us. We're not going to have surplus things. And the fourth one is program outreach. That's new. This is a new part of a cost principle. Frequently, especially in the PEPFAR world, we might be using social media. We might be using advertising, radio time, TV commercials. That sort of stuff will be allowable. Okay. Other than that, not allowable. Okay. So just be careful there. So as an auditor, I'm putting on my auditor hat saying, great, what did you do there? Why did you have that meeting? Okay, you've got, and plus, you can never promote your organization. What you're promoting is your project, your USAID project, right? So we are care and treatment, all this sort of stuff. Okay, so all these displays and exhibits and stuff, if it's not about the project, if it's about the organization, that is not gonna fly, okay? Now people ask frequently, how about hats and t-shirts and stuff? Okay, well that depends. One, as Adrian said, did you put it in your proposal? So I say, yes, well, every month we have to go out and do a public awareness campaign and we're going to give out hats and shirts. Okay, well, put it in there. But the hat better say, I know my status, or the shirt says, I know my status. It's not your logo. Okay, your logo, USAID logo can go on the arms, but certainly it's got to be about the project. Okay. Advisory councils, the only reason I include this is not because this is where you may have to recognize certain authority and communities and stuff, but this change, it used to say it only was allowable as a direct cost, and now advisory councils is allowable as an indirect cost. Okay, so you have to be careful here. A lot of times AOs are still saying direct cost everything. Well, if they tell you to direct cost it, as an auditor, I'm saying if the AO said you can, you can. But generally, for this type of expense, and there are others, they are meant to be indirect. So if you don't have a NICRA, and when many of you are not going to have a NICRA, negotiated indirect cost rate, then this is what your 10% de minimis is probably meant to cover. Okay. Alcohol, not allowed. Forget about it. Audit costs, related services, your yellow book audit. Okay, now we're going to talk about, you may need a statutory audit. Auditor or recipients now, you in your countries, frequently if you get foreign money or regardless to be a registered NGO, you need a statutory audit. But when you receive US aid funding, you're going to need what we call a yellow book or a GAGAS audit, generally accepted government auditing standards. Okay, that's a separate independent audit. Okay, that one, USAID says, well, if we're requiring it, we're going to pay for it. So there's no doubt about that one. But how about now your statutory audit? Well, it depends. Did you need to? I have had long discussions with our rig down here. We've got a great rig, Rob Mason. We have great discussions on how, is this going to be allowable? And his question legitimately was, well, was it a requirement? Did they have to have it? And if the answer is yes, then it's allowable. The US government will pick up its fair share. But what's a fair share? Well, who else is your donor? They should each pick up their fair share. Okay. And then the third bullet point, cost for agreed upon procedures for managing subs. Primes, if you're going to be a prime with a sub, you have some serious responsibilities to make sure they're competent, you're managing them correctly. Those costs to manage your subs are allowable. Okay. Here's the problem with primes, and especially primes with subs. You may not realize all the costs that you're going to incur or the responsibilities you're going to be responsible for. Okay. So what the problem is, you don't know what you don't know. Okay. So the whole point is if you're going to become a prime, you might want to talk with previous primes. Again, the big guys, FHIs, PathPac, those guys who know and are generally very helpful to you to say, whoa, let's look at your budget. Let's look at your proposal. We didn't put in for the yellow book audit. You didn't put in for training. You didn't put in for certain types of costs that you're going to have. Okay, get knowledgeable on your costs. Bad debts, unallowable. Why should the US government pick up your bad debts? You should have managed better. Okay, communications costs. This used to be a specific cost principle. It used to be number 7, but it's not mentioned anymore. So people say, well, does that mean I can't charge it? And as I said earlier, no, if you have to incur the cost, if it's reasonable, so maybe you have 100 community care workers and they're all going to charge $5 a month for data, okay? Or you need, of course, Wi-Fi and all this kind of stuff. If you have to incur it, if you need it as part of the program, it will be allowable. But again, you can certainly ask your AO and get confirmation. You probably first get your AOR buy-in, say, AOR, look, we got all these people out in the field, we need it. He or she's going to say, yeah, that makes sense. So put it through your AOR to your AO and get it in writing. Okay, compensation for personal services. This is probably the most contentious because, not contentious, the most important cost principle, because normally salaries are the biggest item in most organizations' budgets. Okay, so this one, I highly recommend, regardless of anything else you read this one, okay? And the section you want to read is 430 in Roman numeral I, okay? There's a lot of stuff in the first part that relates to universities and educational institutions. Unless you're an educational institution, fly past that, but certainly go to 430I and see what the requirements are. Okay, so but the basic concept is everything you pay for your employees might be allowable, okay? Again, salaries, fringe, pension, hardship, only to the extent though that they're reasonable in amount. We're going to talk about reasonableness. The second bullet point is new, follows an appointment made in accordance with local laws, okay? Because Kenya laws may be different than Ghana or Ethiopia or Egypt, right? Make sure you have a competent HR person who creates your contract with your employees. Make sure they have an out clause, because it could happen that your project could be terminated or suspended or put on hold, like when COVID is on right now. So what does your contract say? Many employees are going to say, no, you have to pay me. That's the rule of our country. Okay, so sometimes when organizations come over from the States and they set up shop in X country, they don't get a local expert and they have problems. And so just please make sure you use local experts. Okay, and then finally, determined and supported. Effectively, we say timesheets. That's what we're talking about. Be able to prove, and we'll go through some of these just now. Okay, so what's reasonable? Couple concepts. So again, I talked about the M&E person. So if I want one M&E person is making $25,000, I would think that's sort of a benchmark. And unless you have a reason why the M&E person on the USAID project must be better, costs more, then generally same services, similar pay. Okay. So again, I'm not, if I wear the auditor hat, I'm auditing your USAID project. That's my timer. I'm auditing your USAID project. And now I'm going to say, all right, let's see. I'm not auditing the EU project. I'm seeing how much you pay your people. And you're going to say, Doug, that's none of your business. I'm going to say, no. I'm not auditing them. I'm looking for consistency and reasonableness. Okay, the second point is the labor market. So frequently, countries may have what do we call them? Salary surveys. Or there's something called a mission local compensation plan. You take that into consideration. What does the U.S. government pay its employees? Okay, and so I will be looking for, I see three types of, so either if there's a salary survey, great. Otherwise, it's whatever the market will bear. How much do I need to, what's an arm's length value of a person? Okay, well, I see three types of employees or three types of organizations. One, the private sector. And generally, the private sector pays more. Okay, so don't benchmark yourself against the private sector to say Standard Bank pays this or HSBC pays this, because that's not your market. The next market is the international NGO market, what we call the bigs, those guys. But they have very generous policies and procedures, and they may have pensions and savings plans and wonderful medical plans and all that. If that's your segment, then that's your benchmark. But for your new local implementing partners, that's not you either. So your market is the third market, which is local implementing partners. Okay, and in our previous discussion on this, we had a discussion, I think it was in Ethiopia as well. You said, oh, but I can't get the guys. I want a good guy. Well, if you want a good employee, you may have to woo them away from one of the bigs, and it may cost more. Document it, justify why you did it. Okay, there might be some questions on incentive compensation. Can you do it? Yes, based on three things. One, first, you have to have either the project has to do better or cost reduction. So next, it has to be reasonable in amount, and that is undefined. And thirdly, you have to reach your agreement on what that person's going to achieve. What incentive are you giving them? So if you say maybe the doctor who does male circumcisions normally does 100 a month, and you're saying, we're behind here, can't you do any more? Guys, oh, I could work weekends and stuff. You say, great. Okay, well, if you do 150, we'll give you an extra 10% or 15%. Okay, but he can't get to the end of the month and say, I did 160. Then you say, okay, we'll give you a bonus because there was no incentive. Okay, so just be careful on that, and you must document your incentive program. There's a lot of people go wrong on that, and so you must have a policy on that. Okay, so here are the brief items of that 430-I, or Roman numeral I. So here is where it's important. As your auditor, now I'm saying, okay, how much are you charging your project for your employees? Now, it's pretty straightforward when an employee works 8 hours a day on a project. Okay, so he or she, you still need a timesheet. So it's interesting that here is what it says. It doesn't say timesheet once. It talks about systems of controls, but each of these effectively screams timesheet. Okay, so how much am I going to charge to my USAID project? Okay, now notice this thing is peppered with musts. Charges to the award for salaries must be based on records. Accurately reflect the actual work performed. These records must. So again, my radar's gone up twice already. Okay, as the auditor, show me you do this. Okay, so A, system of internal controls. I'm not going to read these to you, but again, I've got to make sure you've got a control system over time. Next, it's got to be part of your policy. So what's your policy? How do people keep time? You need one. Okay, reasonably reflect total activity. So you don't have 3 timesheets, right? USAID, the US government wants to see 1 timesheet with all of the work they do. And you're saying it's not the US government's, why does the US government care what hours I have on my EU project? And really, they don't really care. I mean, I care as an auditor to make sure there's a system of controls. But to be honest, that allocation has more to do with NICRAs and indirect costs to know what's a direct and indirect. So it's not really to monitor what you're doing for some other donor. Okay? and that's the fourth bullet point, encompass both federally assisted, meaning US government or your US aid project, and all other activities compensated by you for your employees, again, in one place. Okay, so this goes on and on. These are musts. These records must comply with your policies and procedures. So what are your policies and procedures? So again, one more time, as an auditor, I'm looking to see, did you follow the US government rules and did you follow your own rules? Okay, so if your policy is we do monthly timesheets and the employee signs off and a supervisor signs off, that's your policy. Okay, the US government policy actually never was that. The original cost principles only required that either the individual or the supervisor signs off. But most people did have employee, supervisor sign off, okay? So you can't come back later if I come in and say, okay, your policy says employee, supervisor sign off, and you can't say, well, USA doesn't require it. I say, you do, that's your policy. So please comply with your own policies. Okay, the rest of these are pretty much just saying you need timesheets. So the most common finding as an auditor is people charge budget versus actual on their timesheets. Okay, you can't do it. Okay, you'll see there the third bullet point, budget estimates alone do not qualify as support. I need actuals. Okay, so don't show me a timesheet that says every day, all month, someone worked 3.5 hours on something because, and then I say, well, what was the budget? Oh, it's 3.5 hours. I mean, you charged budget. Okay, so, you know, there's ways auditors test this. They'll say, great, show me your timesheet today. Okay, and how did you do, you know, so today you were working only on the USAID audit because I'm here as an auditor. So at the end of the week, I'm going to check your timesheet. So there's ways we test for that. So just be careful, charge actual. People say, oh, it's about over budget, under budget. Don't worry, there's massive budget flexibility. We can talk about that later. Okay, so please, that's the most important thing. Okay, now I'm realizing we've got time issues here. So fringe benefits, this is 431. You can charge fringe benefits to the US government, but I'm looking for consistency and reasonableness and written policies, okay? Yes, you can have a medical plan. Yes, you can have other sorts of things, but does everyone get it? Do the guys on the EU project get it? Or you're just charging USAID because they've got deep pockets? No, that's the wrong answer, okay? So just be careful on your benefits. Conferences, so here it's the new thing here is the second bullet point, exercising discretion. There's not going to be any more conferences in Las Vegas and Disney World, certainly not Sun City or, you know, on Llama Island and wherever you are, right? We're not looking for 5-star venues. We're looking for adequate venues, reasonable to hold these conferences. Again, we're talking now so many people doing it on Zoom or webinars. You may not need a conference in the future. Okay, contingencies, not allowed. You ought to be able to define what you need. So as Adrian said, right, be very clear when you're doing your descriptions, your budget justifications of, you know, what do we need to charge money for? There's a couple exceptions there. Of course, you don't know your severance or pension funds until the end of the year. So you might put in a placeholder there, but at the end of the year, you're going to true it up or reconcile. Okay, fines, penalties, claims, not allowed. Your job is to follow the rules of your country and the US government, and they should not conflict, okay? Of course, the AOs move around the world between countries, but underneath them or next to them, guiding them are their assistants, the A&O specialists, and they're normally from the country, and they know, okay, if your agreement officer is gonna write a contract or an award, and the A&A specialist can say, sorry, we can't do that. In this country, you can't do that, or you must do this, okay? So they'll protect the AO from issuing, hopefully, a deficient award. Okay, but then the bottom line here is don't break the law. Follow the law. Fines and penalties that are your fault are not going to be allowed. I'll leave that as is. Okay, so I can't see because, okay, depreciation, I have explained that. If you own your own assets, you can charge the US government for its fair share of the depreciation. Okay, it used to be called a use charge, but it's effectively, it is a use charge because you're using your building or your assets for the US government. But again, that's the sort of thing you might need generally accepted accounting principles to make sure you're depreciating it over a correct period, not accelerated depreciation. So taking advantage while the US government's funding you, you're going to depreciate it fast to recover more. That's wrong. Health and welfare, allowable. Okay, it used to be morale, health and welfare. They've taken out morale, so that's not specifically allowable. But in general to keep your employees healthy. Okay, so you might have mental health days. You might have days where you have specialists come in to talk about coping with COVID. That's part of the FPD online series you have that ASAP has made available. Okay, so basically, but to keep your people healthy is allowable. Okay, it's fair share. Entertainment, generally not allowable unless it has a programmatic purpose. So you might need to get an entertainer into a venue to draw in a crowd you're looking for. You want to talk to youth between 18 and 25, and you want 10,000 people to fill the stadium, you're not going to get it without entertainment. Okay, in that case, you define it, you say, great, X DJ is going to come and they're going to do whatever, entertain for a period, and then we're going to talk about HIV, we're going to talk about becoming a volunteer or a community worker. That's allowable, but specifically, it's entertainment, not for you, it's entertainment for your audience. Okay, here's equipment, taking off my auditor hat. I'll put it on in a second here. This is what you asked earlier. Here's the rule, the definition for equipment. Okay, tangible personal property, meaning 1 year of useful life, greater than that, or $5,000, or your own policy. And again, most people use, most foreign NGOs or LIPs use the lesser amount. Okay, I just want to highlight here. This is one people generally don't catch, putting the auditor hat. Notice what's under general purpose equipment. Okay, under general purpose equipment, office equipment, IT, vehicles. Okay, this defines a vehicle as deemed general purpose equipment. Well, notice how general purpose equipment on the next slide says it's supposed to be treated. General purpose equipment, meaning vehicles, are unallowable as a direct charge unless you get prior approval. I bet most of you are going to have vehicles and you're probably direct charging them. Okay, did you get prior approval? I doubt it. Did you ask for it? I doubt it, because most people don't even realize that. So again, read these things, and even if you don't have it now, go to your AO and say, AO, I'm not sure. I've certainly got a line item for vehicles or equipment, and can you please confirm that I can charge these directly? Okay, this kind of stuff is what's in your cost principles. Get to learn them. Exchange rates, just be careful. Obviously, with the dollar being strong, most foreign local currencies are depreciating, meaning you're getting more rands, kwacha, shillings, nara for your dollar. They are going further, so that's good for you. Okay, what this says is basically if the local currency went worse or it got stronger against the dollar, you need to work with your AO. And generally, you probably aren't going to get more money, but work with your specific AO. Okay. Fundraising, investment management, I'm going to go more quickly here. Essentially not allowed. But you're saying, how am I going to be sustainable? Don't you want me to be sustainable? I do, but basically you can't charge the US government for fundraising. So this is your unrestricted fundraising. This is not when you're doing bids and proposals. This is where you are reaching out to your community or the business community. Please give us money. This is your rainy day money, okay? Unrestricted funds. US government's not going to pay for that. Personal use, goods and services, no, right? You're not going to use the project vehicle. You're not going to use the project computer. So you know, I mean, who's going to know if you're using the computer at home? You know, I can't audit that, but you're not supposed to. Okay, don't bring your kids' homework in on the weekend and make 20 color copies for the class. Right? That's not what it's about. The project assets are for the project. Insurance indemnification, yes. Look at the third bullet point, though. Right? And U.S. government, USAID is getting very tough on this. Okay, if you could have insured stuff, assets, and you didn't, and you have a loss, then you have to pay for it. Actual losses that could have been covered are unallowable. Okay, so there's no reason not to insure your assets. Okay, USAID, that's the rule. Okay, if you could have insured it and you didn't, and there's a loss, you pay. Lobbying, not allowed. I'll leave it at that. Okay. Losses on other contracts, not allowed. Each project stands alone. Don't start moving your money around. You can't move money because that's obviously an income line or the revenue, but people move expenses. They say, oh, you're the new project. Can you pick up our motor pool costs? Can you pick up our gas or petrol? Can you pick up our maintenance? Because you've got a new project and you've got new money. No, each project gets its fair share. Maintenance and repair, of course, maintain your equipment. Normally, you're going to get to keep it at the end of the project. So why wouldn't you keep it in good working order? You're expected to. Do the maintenance on your vehicles and generators and whatever else you need. Materials and supplies, of course. But here we would get into more of a question of how do we treat it directly or indirectly? And if you can treat charges directly, please do that. Okay, membership subscriptions, generally allowable. And people start to say, I didn't know I could charge this. Well, you can. So again, learn what you can charge. But I want to know, it's allowable, but is it allocable? Okay, so if you've got a doctor and she or he wants to study the new code, something, yeah, that relates to the project. I could see how you could use it on that project. But if the doctor wants to learn underwater photography, no, it's got nothing. You know, is it training? Yes. Is it related to the project? No. So it's not allocable. Okay, remember, every cost has to be reasonable. I don't care if it's a $10 course, which should be $1,000. It's very reasonable in amount. It's just not allocable. Nothing to do with the project. Okay, participant support costs, yes, allowable. Prior approvals. You would, if we had time, we'd have a lot of prior approvals. I'm going to spend 5 more minutes and take the questions. Okay, plant security, absolutely. Protect your people, protect your assets, protect your data. Make sure there's all kinds of rules now. Of course, PEPFAR people, we know that personally protected information we must secure. Also, just be aware, on the contract side, you're not allowed to use Kaspersky, and you're not allowed to use Huawei equipment. That hasn't worked its way over yet to assistance yet, but I would bet it will. So next time you're updating your virus software, think twice. Ask USAID, has there been any rule on not using Kaspersky? Okay, professional service costs, yes. But you remember, when you're buying your auditor, your lawyer, whatever else, if you hired Sustainability Solutions to be your auditor, you would have to jump through extra hoops, because not only is it a procurement, you should be competing it, but you have to make sure that we're only doing what you asked us for, that we're competent, our people are qualified, they're GAGAS accredited. So when you're buying services, there's an extra level of effort you have to go through. Proposal costs, allowable as indirect costs. And this is the primary reason why COFAR designated the 10% de minimis, okay? The 10% would be covering costs that cannot be charged directly. So and I don't think any AO would ever allow you to charge proposal costs to their project as a direct cost. Notice what it says here. You can charge both winning and losing bid and proposals of both US government and non-US government costs. Okay, but it needs to be an indirect cost. It's the primary reason people have a NICRA. Okay, so some organizations go after everything. Basket weaving in Baluchistan, we'll find the guy. We'll find a chief of party. Okay, so they write proposals day and night. Okay, and if they lose, that's fine. A losing EU proposal, the cost for that goes into your indirect pool and gets recovered. But there's no way that you are going to ask your AO, geez, AO, can you let me direct charge a losing Gates Foundation proposal? We can say, no, it's not allocable. That's what the 10% is going to be used for. Okay, what do we got here? Sorry, the top is coming. Recruiting costs, yes, but you need a program and have it in writing of how you recruit people. It's pretty straightforward. You can reload people, but be careful. If you hire someone, you relocate him or her, and they quit within 12 months, USAID is not going to pay for it. So if you're going to hire someone and move them, you need some sort of leverage over that person. Otherwise, you might get stuck with relocation costs. Rental costs, here was your question earlier, allowable. One, they got to be reasonable. And then the third bullet point, less than arm's length leases are allowable only to the amount that would be fair in an open marketplace. Taxes, allowable if you can't avoid them. Okay, so first bullet point, if you can get an exemption, get it. Local implementing partners, many countries have VAT across Africa and other places, value-added tax. Okay, people say, oh, we're an NGO, we don't need to do that. Yes, you do. If you're going to incur VAT costs, get registered. Okay, now if you can't avoid it, maybe you can't get it as an NGO, or maybe you can't get it because you're not a certain size. At that point, then it's going to be an allowable cost. But if you can avoid it, don't charge the US government. Termination costs are allowable, but that would be under closeouts. We'll cover this in later sessions. So just be very careful. Generally, yes, you can pay for termination costs, but I'm going to wear my auditor hat on saying reasonable. The time you think about getting out of your project is when you get into it. Okay, all your out clauses for your employees, for your lease, for your rentals, for any contract you're going to have, try to build in an out clause. So if you get terminated or suspended, you can close out quickly and not incur unnecessary expenses. Training and education, this is the entire cost principle. I think it's 11 words, right? It's allowable, but is it allocable? What does it have to do? Does that guy need that course? How is that going to benefit the project? Travel, look up federal travel regulations. There's a lot of stuff here, but basically assume you will be traveling economy. And of course, people say, can I go business class? Generally, you need some pretty good reasons for that. And that's probably beyond this course as of now. But you can go, so where are all these travel costs are on www.state.gov. Look up federal travel regulations, per diems. That's where you're going to have all the guidance on that. Finally, trustees. Okay, so people say, oh, you need to have a board of directors and a trustees, but what's allowable? Well, that's got to be reasonable. And I'm going to wear the auditor hat. And the general rule of thumb is for someone to have a board sitting. Okay, many countries, people do it for free. But if you don't, some countries you pay for directors or trustees. Okay, and many times you're required to have 3 or 4 meetings a year. A general rule of thumb is there should be maybe no more than 2 hours of preparation for every hour of board sitting time. So if you're going to have a 4-hour board meeting and that guy charges, he or she shouldn't charge more than 8 hours of their time at a reasonable rate. Okay, that's it. I'm just going to just give me 2 more minutes of grace time. This is incredibly important. When we talk about 10% de minimis, MTDC, now that's not in this course, but I want to throw it out there for all, certainly the USAID and the large organizations. This guidance comes from the 3rd and final Q&A of COFAR. And certainly we'll send this to anyone, and ASAP will put it up on their site or make it available, right? But MTDC, modified total direct cost, it's a very big gray area right now, but this is one you don't want to get wrong. And so here in this, people put up questions to the OMB and asking, and this one asks about, it's confusing of how to calculate modified total direct costs. And new recipients, this is going to be the base upon which you're going to add your 10%. So you can have this 10% de minimis, okay? And so they're asking, it seems confusing, and can you please tell us, is there a better definition? And basically the COFAR guy said, no, this is it. But notice the 3rd bullet, the point here is, in general, assume it's going to be total direct costs excluding those items. Total direct costs, okay? So you don't have to build up your budget, basically. You start with total and you exclude the costs that aren't, like rent, equipment, scholarships, and all these other things, okay? So this makes it much easier if you think about total direct costs minus specific items versus trying to question, oh, is this or this? No, go to total direct costs and start there. Okay, just a point. Okay, this says, okay, I'm going to stop now. This is just a talk about AOR designation letters and the new requirement for your performance review. So recipients, just talk to your AOR about how you're going to be evaluated over your 5 years, because I wouldn't leave my last AOR to, I wouldn't trust necessarily, not my AOR, but that they're necessarily going to have the ability to understand what you did over the full 5 years. So I would have a program with my AOR on that. And finally, okay, this is very important, guys. The audit, so okay, everyone knows now that non-US NGOs must have an audit conducted in accordance with the uniform guidance. This is what it currently says. Okay, the current mandatory standard provision says you must have what we call it the Yellow Book or GAGAS audit in accordance with this. Okay, the only problem with that is we don't do these overseas. Okay, this needs to change. If anyone's on from CFO or OFM Washington, okay, what it used to say, this is the old guidelines from 2012, before the new guidance came out. It was specific in here that says, conduct the audit in accordance with those old OIG guidelines. Okay, that's what overseas auditors know. Okay, that's what they learn the Yellow Book, and this is what the OIG used to include. So the new guideline says this, 2 CFR 200. Well, that's a problem. Okay, what we need to say is the standards has to say in accordance with ADS 591, which the mission certainly is sharing with the implementing partners. Okay, and we've seen this time and time again, because the primes pass down this rule and then they expect to get this, but primes, you're not going to get this. If you're a US prime, you're not going to get this out of your local African or PEPFAR non-US partner. Okay, we can answer questions at any time. Thanks very much. I mean, sustainability appreciates being given the opportunity to work with IntraHealth and USAID. Questions, please.
Thanks, Doug. We have quite a lot of questions. So I'll read through the top of the list that were voted by folks for your consideration. And then if we don't answer everything, I'll just remind people that we will also send written responses after the call. So the first question, can you please go over an explanation of communication cost? Do you mean if we have data and airtime costs already captured in the approved budget, we still need to seek the AO's approval before spending?
Okay, no. Okay, I was just using, that's a good question. And if you put it in your budget and they approved it, as I said, generally USAID's pretty good at looking at it and saying, okay, that's an allowable cost. So the answer is no, I wouldn't, you don't have to seek prior approval. You could, but if it was in there, I'd assume it's okay. Wearing my auditor hat, is it reasonable now, right? Because USAID doesn't look for reasonableness. So data costs, yeah, people in the field are gonna have to incur Wi-Fi and data, fine.
Mm-hmm.
How much? So I don't want to see the community workers getting $10 a month and the head of the group gets $30 a month and the chief of party gets $100 a month. And I ask why, and they say, well, he's the chief of party or she's more important. That's not, you know, who uses the data? Show me the guy needed that budget for the data they're going to use. Okay, so I'm going to look more at the reasonableness of it versus the whether it's allowable. Assume it is allowable. It's just not specifically allowable. Okay. Good.
Okay, great. Okay, so the next question is on timesheets. Is 2 CFR 200 the same as the previous OMB A122, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act, which exempts some employees, administrative and professional employees, from keeping records of hours worked each day? So essentially, does this mean that directors and CEOs do not need to keep timesheets?
Okay, so that's probably a reasonably sophisticated NGO asking that question. I don't believe, and again, any AO can jump in here. I don't think the Fair Labor Standards Act applies overseas. Okay, certainly the cost principles are global, but I think that would be more of a probably US NGO asking that. So directors and leadership, if they work put it this way, if you're going to charge the salary line item as a direct cost for a person, he or she is meant to be able to justify that time. Okay, so frequently directors don't. Okay, so they just say, no, not that I'm above it, but I just do so many things. There's just no way I can define what I do. Okay, well, that's what you'd want to possibly use the 10% de minimis for. Okay, if we were going to get deep into direct, and I'll stay till 3 more hours here to answer all the questions. So as long as you're happy, I'm happy. But the concept of there's very few costs that essentially are meant to be indirect, and that is one of them. A CEO of an organization or her or his sort of maybe personal assistant, those are generally deemed indirect. Okay, otherwise, that's we talked about intermediate cost objectives and those sort of things. So maybe the finance team, if you jump through some hoops, you can have intermediate cost objectives and then reallocate those down to projects based on some logical basis. So that's how you would turn indirect costs into other direct costs, but it's an allocation methodology. But for generally if you're not going to do timesheets, how am I, wearing the auditor hat, going to determine the fairness of the allocability? Okay. Now you could put that to your AO, and I've seen this once. We had an organization that the CEO said, I do the same thing every month, but I've got X number of projects, and how do I do it? I said, okay, 1 month, do keep a timesheet. Okay, and so again, 1 hour here, 1 hour there. That they actually did it, and I say, okay, so that's what you normally do. You guy says, yeah, that's what my life is about. Okay, I said, apply to your AO. Say, dear AO, this is my life. It's like this. Here's the timesheet I had. So I have these projects. So in this month, 8 or 9% of my time was charged to USAID, And then we asked whether, dear AO, now if I do that, if I certify every month that my month was like this month, is that okay for you? And she said yes. Okay, now that's specific to that AO, but you could go to that length. But you have to, again, you certainly have to ask and clear that with your AO.
Okay,
Each
thanks,
AO is
Doug.
different.
The next question is related to COVID, and maybe Adrian can help answer this.
Okay.
During COVID, if staff are working virtually and completing timesheets, but they are not able to deliver on their outputs compared to pre-COVID, will salary be questioned?
Okay, what can you see on my screen right now? What's showing?
I see your presentation with the PowerPoint, and it's
Okay,
on audits.
wait, let me see if I can't share a different screen. Okay, so I have up the memorandum from May 8th authorizing COVID-19 flexibilities pursuant to OMB memorandum M-20-17, okay? You guys can all get this. I mean, I'll happy to put it up somewhere, but I'm sorry that this screen is not sharing. But I just want to highlight, and I've talked to AOs, I've talked to the RIG, because this worries me, and I'm wearing my auditor hat. This specifically worries me. It talks about, so number 6 talks about allowability of salaries and other project activities. Okay, so conceptually, yes, it's going to be allowable. You can't get to work. I would certainly talk to my AO. Okay, but you still have to. There's still a requirement for Part 302 financial management. So my concern is what's going to go on your timesheet. Okay, and again, an auditor after the fact is going to say, well, what did you do during those days? Okay, you're charging 8 hours. So I did, and again, there's no one right answer, but please read your numbers 6 and 7 of those guidelines and talk to your AO. Because it talks about, okay, so it's reasonably specific on salaries. It says you may continue to charge salaries and benefits currently to awards consistent with your policy of paying salaries. So I highlighted this to my AO and my RIG. I said, okay, so that means, so you better, I would suggest you create a policy now. If you're going to charge these costs, whip up a policy, get it approved by your board or management, and put that to your AO, saying, here's our policy. I can't work. We can't get out. We're under lockdown. Okay, so our policy is to continue to pay. So I come around with the auditor hat and say, that's the policy. You ran it by your AO. That's fine. Okay, well, I'm saying it's fine. Hopefully they says it's fine. Okay, the second point of that number 6, though, is quite interesting. It says recipients may charge other costs to their awards as necessary to resume activities supported by the award. Okay, but it says these, prior to incurring these reactive activities, you must notify your AO and AOR of these costs. Okay, so start thinking now. This is a must. As an auditor, I'm wearing the hat saying must. Did you notify your AO and AOR of these costs? Okay, so if you're under lockdown or not doing stuff now, get a list of all of the of what you believe you're going to have to do, and ask now for prior approval. Okay, so that's again, I'm not going to read all these things. There's one other one though I do want to mention, and this talks about allowability of costs not normally chargeable to awards. This is number 7. Okay. And basically, you are meant to get prior approval. Okay, the USAID may allow recipients who incur costs related to cancellation of events, travel, or other activities, and reasonable. Anyways, all I'm saying is read it. But they're still expecting you to justify it. Okay, the allowability of it in the financial systems. So I'm going to want to see. Great, someone had to take a special flight. There was an American that had to get out of South Africa. They were willing to charter a flight from New York, Teterboro Airport. Okay, I don't think the U.S. government was going to pay for that, but if they had to if that was Ambassador Burks and she had to get back, the U.S. government would have paid for it. So again, any unique costs, please document, try to get approval.
Thanks, Doug. Adrian, do you have anything to add for this question?
Just that USAID is allowing a lot of flexibility. So if that is your situation, reach out to your AO, and it probably will be covered. Most AOs are approving it based on the guidance that Doug mentioned. So just reach out to your AO, but you should be fine if you get prior approval.
Okay, thank you. I see Catherine is back, and I just maybe wanted to check with Catherine to determine if we wanted to keep going through the questions or if we needed to close. So Catherine, what is your guidance?
Okay, well, I think the meeting is going to determine that because it'll close. So
Okay.
normally at this point, we take all the other questions and our team writes them up, and then we send them to the presenters to provide documented responses, and we send them out to everybody.
Okay, so should we, is that what we should do, or should we answer a few more questions?
You can answer a few more questions. I'm just worried that the meeting is going to log us out. So if it does, if it does, people will understand that that's happened. And if it doesn't, we can continue on for about 15 more minutes.
Okay, let's do that. If Doug and Adrian are able to stay on the line, and folks are welcome to stay on for as long as they can. So, okay, so the next question. I am a new project that has been awarded a new 5-year grant as a follow-on to an old project that has been operating for the last 10 years. Can I budget for new cars, or should I transition old cars from the old project that is closing out?
Okay, I think it has to do, so first of all, with the closeout of the last project, assuming the USAID is going to let you keep them, I would say, yes, you would transition those to your new project and try not to incur any new costs if you don't have to. I mean, don't incur costs you don't have to. Now, if for some reason they're all clapped out and they say, no, just give them to the community, go buy new ones, that would be a choice. But if you don't need to incur costs, please don't. I mean, work with your AO. They would normally say it's what's called an asset disposition plan. And that goes with the end of it's part of your closeout. Okay, so you'd say, dear AO, we're closing out. Here's what we'd like to do with our assets. And I would think that would be your request. We would like to roll these over to the new project. Okay, I'm saying you can't buy new ones, but, and you might say, look, we expect these to last 2 more years. And then at that point, we're just putting, we're putting the note here that there's a good chance we'll need new assets or vehicles in year 3. Okay, but again, if anyone else wants to weigh in, any AOs on that?
Adrian looked like she was going to say something, so.
Oh, I did, and then Doug said it. Yeah, so that should be part of your closeout and disposition plan, where you would talk about how you're transferring assets.
Okay, thanks. The next question is in relation to MTDC charge, the 10% de minimis. I understand that local NGOs are eligible to earn it. In case a prime did not charge at the proposal and negotiation stage, is there still a chance to receive the 10% de minimis, and then more so of sub-grantees earning NICRAs because they are international NGOs?
Okay, you broke up a little bit in the NICRA. Just say the last sentence again, the last about NICRAs.
I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but there's a comment that more so that the sub-grantees earn NICRAs because they are international NGOs. So I wonder if that's a question about international subs under local with the NICRAs.
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. This will be covered not today, but in greater detail later. But the bottom line is the 10% de minimis is an election, okay? It's basically your right to ask for it. And most AOs around the world, USAID, not CDC, most USAID agreement officers are now starting to allow the recipient. Now recipients, that's why I showed you the MTDC, because it's your job to get it right. And I want to be very careful here. There's no doubt I'm going to wear the auditor hat for this one, okay? An MTDC is defined. You're going to get 10% on top of that, okay? But you had to make sure you calculate your base correctly. I've seen State Department issue 10% on total direct costs, okay? And that's wrong. That will be a material error come audit time, and that's going to be a huge problem. So it's your job, recipients, to learn how to calculate your base and ask for it. Now, the question of the prime or a sub, in that COFAR guidance that you have, that I showed you, that question was posed to the OMB. And basically the question was, my prime is not willing to give me my 10%. What should I do? The OMB's guidance back to that sub says, tell your prime, if they're not willing to give you the 10%, they are subject to termination or suspension. Okay, that's what the OMB says. So, I'm no one to say, because of course the prime's going to say you didn't ask for it, or it wasn't in the budget, or we don't have any money. Okay, so there's going to be a discussion between, I guess, the prime and the sub there. And again, I'd like the AOs to weigh in, but I don't think the AO is going to want to award the prime more money. So the prime is in a bit of a tight spot there because, again, it wasn't originally asked for. So yeah, the 10% de minimis is a lively discussion, and that's why it's so important that all you LIPs that are now, planning your budgets, please not only understand what you can charge directly, but do understand this 10% environment. Okay, that's why I included that slide at the very end there about what is actually how to calculate modified total direct cost. If you're taking notes, it's 200.68 in the uniform guidance, but then just remember, get these slide sets and look at that. I would get that Q&A from COFAR. There's a lot of incredibly valuable stuff there, and I'll make that available. I've analyzed the whole thing and put in yellow what I think is important for non-US organizations. So please reach out to ASAP, and Catherine will make it, or her team will make it available. Okay.
And just to add on, I'm not sure if I understood the first part of the question correctly, where you said that the prime hadn't requested it initially. If the prime is a local implementing partner,
Yep.
and they elected to direct bill in their proposal, their application for a grant, it's unlikely that the AO is going to allow them to switch to the de minimis. That kind of needs to be negotiated up front.
Okay, well, the prime, one of the requirements of a prime, a US prime especially, at 200.331, section A says they are, when they're creating a subaward, they are supposed to consider whether the sub is going to have an indirect cost, okay, or the 10% de minimis. So that's their job. So these days, now again, well, remember, we're 5 years since the uniform guidance has been created, and that rule was there in year 1. So, obviously we're within the new uniform guidance. So I can't say anything about that prime, but that was one of the requirements. They must consider whether that sub's going to get an indirect rate or not. So again, I feel sorry for the local partners who don't understand de minimis, didn't understand they had the option for it, maybe didn't ask for it. Yeah. Now, okay, so the one point about the 10% de minimis, people say just direct cost everything, okay? Well, the purpose of the 10% de minimis, when the guys created it, COFAR created it, okay? The purpose was to enable small organizations, they didn't say local or international, so, even a small US NGO who can't go through the process of creating a NICRA, can't go through all the schedules, they said, great, you just use 10%, and that is effectively like a baby NICRA or a de minimis. 2 points. 1, it's not audited, okay? And 2, you don't have to justify what you're going to use the 10% for. Okay, I said in the last webinar, I'll say in this one, and I'll say in the next one, but I don't feel comfortable with that. As an auditor, I need to see that you're not taking advantage of the US government, you're not double charging, and you're not inconsistently charging. So basically, if you're going to plan to ask for the 10% de minimis, and we're helping an organization up Africa right now with this, saying, guys, you create what's called a cost policy statement that defines how you treat costs as direct or indirect. Okay, it's like one of the first steps of a NICRA, but missions aren't real wild about giving NICRAs overseas right now for good reason. Okay, so a cost policy statement says, great, travel is a direct cost when it's on the project, or we treat it as an indirect when the CEO is flying somewhere to go to a generic meeting. And you do that for all your costs. Okay, and then you direct costs. So here's your strategy. You direct costs as much as you can to USAID as a direct cost. Okay, and then you ask for the 10% on top of that. But my caveat is don't come asking for more direct costs once you've set that direct cost, I'll say in stone. But once you've done your job, direct costing stuff, I wouldn't feel comfortable as an auditor that now you're coming back to say, oh, I have new direct costs, and you're getting the 10%. I don't think that's fair. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Doug, Adrian. And I would just add, I think we did, as part of this ASAP webinar series, have a webinar on indirect costs. So I think that was recorded, and we'll direct folks to those resources as well.
Fantastic.
Okay, so the next question, can you address if year-end functions like Christmas parties or other events are allowable?
I'd like to see a show of hands on that one, but
That was voted for. There's 3 people that wanted that question answered.
no. That's entertainment. Now, so let's just say this, the cost of the entertainment, no. The booze, no. The after hours drinks, no. But what people tend to do, and again, I would say it wouldn't hurt to get approval on this either, but people tend to have a function at the end of the year where you do discuss business with a real agenda. So you say, great, on December X, or again, if it's Eid or Diwali or whatever else, depending on your group, and you have a real business function, okay? And then, okay, so maybe you rent the hall in the hotel for your X number of people for the day, okay? And you do real business. And then, but then, okay, after 5 o'clock or when the meeting ends, and then officially the function is over, what you do with that space, frequently people have the party after that. But you're paying for the party, the booze, whatever else, okay? You cannot charge the U.S. government for entertainment or parties. Sorry.
Okay.
Scrooge there.
Thanks. Is there any guidance for developing written procedures for determining allowable costs? As much as organizations have strong internal controls, are there additional training resources on internal costs that should assist organizations in designing and assessing the effectiveness of these written procedures?
Okay. Well, I think, and Catherine can certainly weigh in, or the ASAP team, but I believe some of what ASAP does, they have specialists in many of these countries, and there are funds for that. I certainly don't allocate them, but I believe, again, Kelly, you're paying for them, and I think that's part of this program. So, but certainly the recipients need to be aware that, or the local partners, that there is going to be a need for probably better policies. You need more. I've never seen a local NGO who's starting up to become a prime have policies that are adequate with procurement. Okay, your policies on procurement, on travel, on fixed asset management, some of these things you're going to have to improve. And again, wearing my auditor hat, let me be very careful here. So frequently, small guys, or new guys, you can go to new organizations. You can go to one of the guys who've been there, the organizations that are large international, and say, look, you guys have very good policies and procedures. Can we borrow yours? And there's no reason why a large organization, if they're not competing necessarily, wouldn't necessarily make those available. But be very careful borrowing someone else's procedures if you're not going to implement them, okay? As an auditor, I come in and I ask you, I look at your policies and you say, these are great, your procurement policies are excellent, but you didn't actually do that. And the organization says, yeah, but no, we got these from the large organization and we're small and they're great policies, but we couldn't possibly implement that. Well, that's a foul, okay, that's a finding. So you must implement what you're borrowing or what you're writing up. So are funds available? If you put that into your budget, why not? Why don't you put policy development as a line item in your other direct costs? Obviously, that would be a good one for Adrian to weigh in on. Do you see that as a reasonable request? It's not allowable. Let's just ask that. The question is it going to be allocable?
Sorry, can you restate that?
Okay, so they were asking about funding for creating policies and procedures so they can be compliant under the uniform guidance or the mandatory provisions. You must have policies and procedures for procurement, travel, financial management, all that stuff. Is that an allowable cost? Would that be entertained or accepted in a budget that you're reviewing?
That's a real tricky one because generally we need to see those policies before we award you something. So normally when we do the NUPAs to look to make sure that you basically that you have policies in place and that you are following your own policies. So if you don't have them, you're probably not going to be eligible to receive a cost reimbursable award. And you may need to do a fixed amount award. And in which case, if you're doing a fixed amount award, then yeah, you can have milestones tied to capacity building, which includes writing some of these policies.
Okay.
And to add, Doug, to your question about could ASAP help, yes. We have developed some templates for the local partners that we're working with directly. And we can move to making a suite of policies available for people to adapt, but not to adopt and not implement in accordance with how they see the policy. So we do want to make that caveat that, as you said, you can't just take somebody else's policies and say, here, voila, we have them, but we can make templates available for people to start the process, to fine tune and make decisions on how they want to document their policies and implement them.
Okay.
Catherine, I think the next question is for you. It's how do we get the previous webinar series? Can a link be provided?
Yes, so Freakway Keith, who is on this call, has everybody's emails through our MailChimp listserv, and we have been sending them out regularly. We do hope to have a website very soon where you can go directly to the website and download the presentations and the recordings.
Thanks. Okay, then the next question is about sub-awards. I have a sub-award that receives funding from another donor who insists on using the allocability rules of the other donor. My take is that those rules that the sub insists on using should take precedence, do not ensure a fair share of cost to each donor, and therefore cannot take precedence even if there is no written rules. Can you please provide your thoughts and guidance in terms of general application of different donor sources?
Okay.
Sorry, I hope I translated that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So this frequently happens when organizations are getting money from another mega or large donor. So sometimes the EU insists on theirs. Sometimes the World Bank or IMF insists on theirs. Okay, those are the and generally the little NGO has no choice but to do that. In that case, I would write to my AO and say, dear AO, I get money from EU. Here's their policies. And then I would try to explain how you're going to show that USAID's only picking up its fair share. Okay, you're not, US government's not gouging, or you're not gouging US aid by somehow implementing the other organization's policies. Okay, what worries me is when those other organizations say, we don't want to pay any indirect costs. Okay, we don't want to pick up your overheads. Okay. So at that point, you want to seriously question whether you should take that money. And no one wants to turn away money, but don't take it and think, well, someone else will pay for it. If you don't have, that's why people have fundraising. That's why you have unrestricted costs. That's what you might be able to use the 10% for, okay? But certainly, USAID is not going to pick up someone else's overhead. Okay. I mean, when it's policies, it might be travel. It might be, okay, we're allowed to travel a certain class, or it might be our per diems are a certain sort of thing. In that case, yeah, just document that for your AO and ask for prior approval.
Okay, thank you. The next question may also be related to the COVID memo. Is hazard allowance justifiable for staff other than drivers?
I'll let one of the I didn't see that cost specifically mentioned in the COVID stuff that I've read, but looks like Adrian's ready to answer that one. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I haven't seen anything that says it's specifically allowable either. The only time I can think that it would be allowable is if it becomes a local labor law. So if you are operating in a country that mandates that health workers now get hazard pay, then because you have to be in compliance with local labor law, that would be allowable. But I haven't seen anything that would suggest that you can give hazard pay as of yet.
Okay, thank you. The next two questions are also about working during COVID, which I think you already addressed, Doug. So I'm going to move to one of the questions further down the list. Can you explain if subscription fees are allowable?
Subscription fees, okay.
The chargeability of subscription fees.
Okay, so under memberships, it specifically says those, you know, if you're a doctor and you are, as part of your membership fee, you know, the subscription to the, you know, American Medical Journal or the whatever, that would be allowable, okay? If it's related to your profession and you are practicing that profession on the project. But maybe a doctor, you know, she is a doctor, but her role is switched to HR for some reason, then it doesn't necessarily make sense that you're going to pay for the, you know, the medical journal if they've decided to do HR. So that again, all of these costs, that's why 200.407 prior approval, and that's why mandatory provision number 1 for non-US NGOs says if you don't know, ask. Your AO can make a determination. You know, and I did ask some AOs on this because I said, look, guys, do you really want to be bothered by this? And they said, absolutely. We don't see it as a problem. We see it as an opportunity to clear up gray areas. Okay, so it's when the auditors come in and ask for it and the answer's already there. That's the whole point. So AOs seem to be willing. They don't see it as a burden. They see it as a responsibility that they're happy to address.
Thanks. Okay, there are two questions I missed. Sorry, was someone, or Adrian, did you want to jump in?
Oh, no, I was just going to follow on to what Doug said, what he was alluding to, that subscriptions are allowable. The real question is, are they allocable? Are they necessary for your project? And if they are, then yes, they're allowable. But, you know, there's a lot of different kinds of subscription services.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Sorry, and I will have to jump off shortly. But there were two other questions I missed, so maybe let me just give them back to back. So severance is included as an organizational HR policy, and they compute it monthly. Are you saying that severance of which is part of Fringe is not allowable? And then the second question, can an employee allocate time spent under fundraising on his or her timesheet, as this forms part of her key performance area in her job description? Can it be charged to USAID?
Okay. On the second answer, fundraising, no, it's specifically not allowable. But you got to be careful how you define fundraising. And we're going to go over this in indirect costs, okay? Fundraising is when you're seeking unrestricted funds. We call the rainy day funds, okay? Then it's not allowable. Once you define a specific budget for a specific purpose, that becomes essentially bid and proposal costs, okay? So under that case, but then it would not be chargeable directly, only indirectly, okay? On the first question on severance pay, I mean, you said monthly, but the concept is severance pay is allowable, certainly. That's 431. But you have to get prior approval, and it's quite down in the weeds. It's quite a detail, but you have to have a policy for that, a written policy, and I would seek prior approval that policy is reasonable. Okay, no golden parachutes, no golden handshakes, and yeah, I would want to see that the U.S. government is picking up the same deal for its employees or the employees on my USAID project versus the other projects. So I'm looking for consistency. I'm looking for probably a written policy on that. And I also would like to see that it's a requirement of the country. Okay, is that, you know, in Ethiopia and certain countries, there are specific rules on that. And so certainly follow the rules of the country. That's why we talked about having an HR person and document it and apply it consistently. Adrian?
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely allowable, and this should be something in your initial application budget, and then should be explained in your budget narrative, right? So if you're giving, I see a lot of countries, it's 8.33%, or basically 1 month per year of service. And in budgets, I'll see severance broken out from the fringe, or if it's included in the fringe, the budget narrative then breaks out what is in the fringe. And if it's, you know, severance, if it's medical benefits, any other kind of allowances, and then you tie it back by explaining how you came up with the cost, how you came up with the 8.33%, you tie it back to local labor laws.
Great.
Okay, thank you, Doug and Adrian. I have to jump off, and I believe we're going to be kicked out shortly from the Zoom meeting. So I think we are going to end. I will turn it over to Catherine to close us.
Okay, thank you, Callie, for asking all those questions. And to the participants, we will be documenting the questions with answers and sending them back to you. Thank you, Adrian, for joining the webinar and from USAID's point of view. And thank you, Doug, for another stellar presentation. We really appreciate your time. You've been online for 3 hours. We really appreciate that. And thank you to everybody who's participated today. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time in our series. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Stay safe with COVID-19 and keep tuning in. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Catherine. Bye.